What's up, y'all? Well, this is Wheezy. And if you enjoy this content and find it rather exquisite, please feel free to leave a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple iTunes. And if you would like to support the show with some merch and represent, visit the link below. Much love, y'all. What's up, y'all? Welcome to the What is Truth podcast. I'm your host, Wheezy, and we return with my lovely friends from the Apollo Detectives. We are joined by the legendary Mr. Marcus Allen, Scott Robert Williams, and Mr. Jared White. Should be a fantastic show. If you have your questions, put them in the live chat, and I will be putting them in there as we go along, and we will try to answer as many as we can. I know some people get a little bit bummed out when their answers don't get questioned, but if they don't get answered right away, keep submitting them and we will hopefully eventually get them up there. We did want to start out by sending our thoughts over to the folks in California with the wildfires. I am a former hotshot firefighter myself, so that's something that I worked on many years. And I think, Jared, if you can, or someone mute, it's making a lot of background noise. But yeah, there we go. Perfect. If we can have them in our thoughts, and I believe Scott had a few words that he wanted to start off with.
Yes, I just wanted to offer my deepest sympathies to anybody that's involved in that, anybody that's being affected by the wildfires. It's truly unimaginable. Most people can't comprehend just how devastating a fire is. I have experienced it twice in my lifetime. This is at a completely different level. I mean, just because you have a house fire and you lose everything is one thing, but at least you have neighbors and other family members. These people down here don't have a neighborhood. Nothing is recognizable. They've lost not only the contents, all of those little personal belongings that they don't have value, but they have memories. Okay, you can't get them back. But they walk out there and they don't even have a neighborhood that's recognizable to them anymore. That's a whole different level of devastation, right? It's just unbelievable what those people go through. You realize that the homeless people in California are better prepared to spend the night than they are. That's how devastating it is. So I just wanted to offer my deepest sympathies to those people that are going to be suffering through this for many years to come. It just doesn't end overnight.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, definitely. Our thoughts are with them 100%. All right. So as we stated, this will be another Ask the Apollo Detectives anything. So be spamming that live chat wherever you may be. If you're listening on Rockfin, either one of our YouTube channels or on Rumble, and we will try to get through them. Anyone want to start off with anything?
Yes, I would like to start out by, first of all, setting a few things straight regarding this film footage of the Apollo versus the LRO footage from 66 to 60 or whatever. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. So anyways, what I'd like to do is, first of all, I'd like to roll a little presentation here that I put together. Number one, what it is I will roll it and then I will explain myself as I'm going along. So I will pop that video file up for you, Wheezy, and
Yes,
we
sir.
will go, and then we'll go from there. So it will be, let's see, which one am I looking at? There we go. Okay, so we'll open that one up there. And if you want to roll that, then I'll just narrate it as we're going so I can show what's going on. So what we're seeing here is we're seeing the 900 Ampex 900 machine. This is the 35 millimeter film scans that were taken off of the scans originally on the LRO in the 60s that went around the moon taking photographs. What they did was they transferred that on from the digital tapes onto that film. And that's how we got this. This actually has nothing to do with Apollo when I did some more research on this with Jera. So there are two different things going on here. There's the LRO and then there's the missing Apollo footage. The missing Apollo footage is something we're not even discussing. We never have, and that's as far as that goes. So you'll see this is the LRO that actually took the pictures here. And now what we're seeing is the cleaned up version right here that you're seeing on that 35 millimeter film that they digitized. And when we go over to the McDonald's, that's what we're seeing inside of that studio. What they did was they took all of the films that were sitting around and they trucked them all over to McDonald's, to that restaurant, because they say it had air conditioning and the lighting was good and it was the proper environment. So that's how all those films got in there. I thought that they might have come from that Hangar 1 because a lot of films and photography was going on back in those days as well. They were using that hangar not only for that, but to store airplanes in, and the blimp and everything else. That actually was right across from I believe it was the Moffett Airfield. And that airfield is actually 8 miles as the crow flies to Menlo Park. And I got that wrong. So I'll give that to Phase 52012. He was correct in that. The only thing is he could have been a little bit nicer without all the foul language and everything else. But he was correct on that one, and I'll give him that. So those films actually came from that place, that warehouse, and then they were trucked over to the McDonald's. Now, inside of those yellow cans, that is actually magnetic tape. And when we look at the one in the McDonald's, what we see is that same machine playing those magnetic tapes. And what they do is those magnetic tapes are actually from this LRO that we're seeing right here. And what it did was it scanned the film and then it sent the scans back. So it actually had a laboratory on there to develop that film. And then it scanned the film and then it was transmitted back and it was stored on those data tapes. That's what we're seeing. But then if you noticed, if we went a little bit backwards, you'll notice that there's 35 millimeter film reels. And guess what we have on those film reels? Again, we have the orbital footage. So the confusion was I had thought that perhaps the films came back on that LRO and they were perhaps parachuted down and dropped, and then they developed or they got the original film out of it, but they didn't do that because I went over and had a look at how they did this, and this is what it said here. Lunar Orbiter Program, 1966 to 1967. These missions photographed the moon with some images captured on board film and scanned for transmission back to Earth. The physical film was not returned to Earth as the spacecraft were not designed for retrieval. So this is what Wikipedia says. So what they did was they digitized that film, they took the images off of the digital tape, they cleaned the images up, and then they transferred that over to that 35 millimeter film. So I had got that wrong. I had thought that came from the orbital camera that was outside on the CSM. And that's two different things altogether. So that's my mistake. That's nobody else's fault but mine for not looking at it a little bit further. And it was Zep Tepe that brought this up, one of the subscribers. And I had thought that because that 35 millimeter film was actually there on those reels so clear, I should have researched a little further to find out that those images were actually cleaned up and then transferred to that film. And that's what we're seeing when the fellow holds that 35 meter film up there, when we can see all the orbital data. So anyways, that's my mistake there. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to go on to one other thing here, and I will put that into the chat here. And you guys are going to find this very, very interesting, because if I can pop that file up, and we're going to have a look at this little shadow image here, and just listen to what is being said. I'll just keep quiet and let the video explain itself. So that's the spider video.
As you can see, here we have a mysterious shadow that is going to be going across the screen. There it goes. There he goes. And he's almost at the top. Then he takes off to the right side. Now we're going to do it in slow motion. Notice the shadow on this object that is going up into the center there. Then he's crawling up to the top, independently of the camera, by the way. That's what I want you all to notice. And now he's going to shoot down and go off again to the right. Now we're going to have a look, but from a different perspective, so we could see what this little object is. Do you notice over on the right-hand side? We see a little object that is going from the top to the bottom. Now, what is happening here is this little guy here is on a string, which means that this little object is a spider. And you can see that at the top in slow motion as it drops on the web and then crawls off to the right-hand side. Now, how on earth could a spider survive inside of that LEM when it has been depressurized already? We have to ask the question, are spiders extremophiles? Well, that's a good question, but unfortunately the answer to that is no. So Houston, we have another problem.
Yes, we have another problem indeed. Now, the funny thing about this was that when these guys were doing the EVA, for example, this was Apollo 15. So they had first done the stand-up EVA. This is EVA 1. Then the camera comes back in. And now they're shooting this out the window of the LEM. So that means that that spider would have expired probably 20 minutes ago. So what is it doing crawling down this window? By the way, if you stop and pause the video, right down at the bottom, you can actually see the spider legs and the rear of the spider, the bulbous end of the spider, the thorax. You can actually see it. It's just crazy. So I realized that what Jera was saying, he said that on Skylab 3, I believe it was, that there were spiders on that. But you see, they didn't depressurize Skylab, or else it would have killed the crew inside. So, but in this case here, if this spider was a stowaway, it would have ceased to exist 20 minutes ago, because this is now in a depressurized environment, and yet we see a spider crawling down that window. And if you think that's good, to show one other one. By the way, these were discovered by Chris from Not a Space Agency, and we went over this morning. So what I'd like to do is just show you the last of my presentation here, and I'm going to show the last one here, and this is another very interesting one. Now, I don't know if sunflower seeds are taken along, but anyways, we'll have a look. What do you think this astronaut's doing here? Now, you see the visor's up. Look at the visor. You see at the bottom, his visor's actually up, and that's coming out of his mouth. And his hands, both of his hands are right down at the bottom. So is the left hand and the right one. They're both down. So tell me, where on earth did that spit or that sunflower seed come from, especially when his visor's open? It's not open all the way, but it is open enough so that he can spit that out. Now, if they're on the moon, he's not going to last too long, is he? So that's my presentation. That's what I had to say. And
well, Robert,
yes.
Robert, I must say, the Apollo program had their Hawk 2 moment 50 years ahead of what we have today. These people were famous. It should have gone viral. If we had have had the internet at the time, it would have been viral. I mean, like he's got to spit out that thing. You got to realize that these were some of the most famous people on Earth doing these things, right? And these little things just slide on by. You got to wonder what he had for lunch. That he had to spit that out. But yes, yeah. Definitely the helmet's up. You can see it's up.
Yeah, it's definitely up. Yes.
And of course we looked at it fully zoomed in and slowed it right down frame by frame to look at that, right? It is coming right out of his mouth.
Yes, it is. And there's nothing else there. There's nobody standing behind him either. And both of his hands are down. So, there was one other thing I wanted to address too. Here we go with this vacuum and Newton's third law and vacuum space contradicting propulsion. Well, I'm sorry, but a rocket does work in a vacuum. You do not need anything to push off of. There are 2 YouTube videos displaying this. And I've showed this example in a few videos. And I also put an SDE engine inside of my vacuum chamber, kept the pump going to make sure that it had a good vacuum in there, fired the engine up, and it flew around there, no problem at all. And people are saying, well, yeah, but they had the walls to push off of. Well, when you take a look at some of these rockets, for example, out in space, here's one to explain this. James Van Allen, he had rockoons. What they were rockets attached to balloons that went up to the Kármán line, and then he fired the rockets off the balloon. So you see, it works. There's hardly any atmosphere there, and yet those rockets still took off into the Van Allen belts in order to get the reading. So rockets do work. It's like sitting in a chair with wheels on it. You have a medicine ball. You toss the medicine ball, and guess what? You're going to go backwards in the chair. It's the same thing. You do not need an atmosphere. James Van Allen proved that in that video. So, anyways, that's just what I would like to say. So
I would like to add that too, if I may.
Jerry. Jerry, you wanted to go a little bit deeper into this film, into the orbital film. So take it away.
Yeah, I'll do that in just a second. I would like to add to what you just said about rockets working in space. I've actually, if you want to, Weezy, do you want to share the meme I just posted, the Facebook link I just sent you in the private chat?
Yeah, let's see. Was it the very last link you sent?
Yeah, the very last one, yes.
Okay.
Okay, while you're getting that up, okay, here it comes. Okay, yeah, I put this little diagram together here, you see. I had this debate with a flat earther a couple of years ago, right? He kept citing the rocket thrust equation as evidence that the rockets don't work in space. He kept saying, oh, you need the outside pressure, the P0, for the rocket to work. Every time I explained to him how it works, I showed him how it works mathematically. His response to that was, oh, you never studied physics, you never studied physics, you didn't understand physics. And if he understood physics, or for that matter math, he would immediately see that the minus on the P0 was telling him that the presence of any outside pressure is going to make the rocket less effective. You see, a rocket doesn't work because it's pushing on the air. A rocket works because when the exhaust gases explode inside the combustion chamber, they're pushing on the inner walls of the rocket. All the nozzle does, it creates a point where the gases can escape, and where the gases escape, the pressure at the nozzle is going to be less than the pressure opposite the nozzle, and so since the pressure opposite the nozzle will be dominant, it will push the rocket in that direction. And here what I've done is I've taken the actual equation, and I've plugged in the values. In this case, I'm using the space shuttle. I've got the mass flow rate of the shuttle, that's the propellant mass over the burn time. I've got the exhaust velocity, which is, in this case, it's 4,400 meters per second. I've got the exit pressure of the propellants, the area ratio, and in this case, we got two examples here. We got the P0 as in air, and we got P0 when it's in space. And as you can see from this simple equation, the rocket produces much more thrust when it's in space. Okay, so yeah, not only do rockets work in space, they actually work better in space. Now, getting back to the topic of the lunar orbiter tapes, if you want to share the penultimate link I shared, the LA Times link. Okay, yeah, so this is an article that was published covering the Lunar Orbit Image Recovery Program. Okay, and now the Lunar Orbit Image Recovery Program, as the name suggests, it was a group to basically take the original lunar orbiter tapes. I noticed William's excuse me, I'm slurring my words here. I noticed, Robert, you made this mistake a few times. You said the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. It's actually the Lunar Orbiter. Lunar Orbiter. You see, they called them Lunar Orbiters 1 to 5 in the 60s. Okay.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. They seem to have named it such that it confuses people. But anyways, the Lunar Orbiter took pictures of the moon down to 1 meter resolution. Okay, and it basically showed the details. This is how they made accurate sets and props, for training purposes. Okay, and there's a section in this article which I think is relevant. Here we go. It says here, although the original high-resolution images were saved to 2-inch wide tape, those pictures weren't seen by the public. The images that scrolled across television screens and appeared on the front pages of newspapers were snapshots of the originals using a standard 35mm film. These images were grainy and washed out, like a poorly tuned television set. So, as was the case with the Apollo missions later on, the lunar orbiter pictures were photographed off TV screens. And that's all the public ever saw. The reason, at least in the case of lunar orbiter, they have a debatably legitimate reason for doing so. They said they wanted to make sure that those on the other side, the Soviets or the Koreans or whoever, they didn't know how good their resolving capabilities of their spy satellites were. Because remember, the lunar orbiter cameras, they had pretty much the same resolution as American spy satellites. Anyways, there was this woman at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory called Nancy Evans, and she ended up in possession of all these tapes. Her superiors actually wanted them to be destroyed. We don't keep those, we just get rid of them. We erase them, we tape over them, we destroy them, whatever. And because of the historical significance of these tapes, she felt she couldn't morally allow that to happen. So she ended up basically stockpiling all these tapes herself. And in the 80s, she came in possession of three 900 machines, these three FR 900 machines, and unfortunately, these were the tapes that played these were the machines that played those tapes back. But unfortunately, none of the machines she had access to were able to work, and so for the longest time, they just sat in a garage with all these tapes, all these machines, not just collecting dust essentially. And later on in the 2000s, a fellow by the name of Dennis Wingo, right? He approached her and said, "Hey, listen, I got the funding, I got the funds to try to get these tapes all digitized, get these machines repaired, and let's do it." And so they transferred the tapes to the McDonald's near the Ames Research Center. The director of the Ames Research Center let them use it there because as Robert said, it was well air conditioned and an ideal place where they could do it. And so they transferred the tapes and they transferred the 900 machines to the McDonald's, and they had the machines repaired. They basically cannibalized parts from each of them into one working unit. And over the years, they basically transferred these analog lunar orbiter tapes to digital files. And so now those digital files, they can easily be seen on the internet. And in fact, you showed the famous Earthrise photograph earlier, didn't you, Robert?
That's the one where they cleaned up after they digitized it.
Exactly, yes. And so I had been following the Lunar Orbiter image recovery project for quite some time because I was very keen to see the unfiltered images myself because, as I said before, it were these lunar orbiter pictures that they used to make accurate sets and props, based on the landing sites. People like to say, oh well, we've got post-Apollo pictures, then we can see that the surface details match. This crater matches, this hill matches. It matches with all the pictures by the astronauts. Well, how do they know in advance? Well, here's a question for you, right? Even if Apollo was real, right, what do you think is more logical? Oh, let's just send some guys to the moon and hope that where they're going to be touching down in is safe to touch down in. Or better idea, why don't we take some pictures of the landscape in advance? Okay, this place is bad, this one's good. Actually see what it looks like up close. If I got this book here, for example, this is We Reached the Moon by John Noble Wilford. He actually has a passage in here of about the lunar orbiters that I'd like to share with you. Here we go. He says here, the photographic system built by Eastman Kodak Company incorporated a wide-angle lens and a telephoto lens. The camera shutters operated simultaneously so that each exposure produced two pictures, a medium-resolution shot and a high-resolution shot. In the medium-resolution picture, objects 8 yards square, about the size of a boxing ring, showed up clearly. The high-resolution lens picked up details as small as the top of a card table, which puts it into perspective. And so, obviously they had that kind of resolution to see, with meter resolution accuracy. So obviously they knew what the landscape looked like in advance. And officially they did, in fact, use these pictures to design models of the moon, sets and props, for the training purposes. Yeah. And well, they
Jared, you're cutting out. Your connection here is
how's this? Hang on.
Yeah, and it's really bad.
How's this?
No,
is this better?
Yeah, it's scratching.
I'll get the old mic. Hang on.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you can mute in the meantime, I'll mute them. All right.
Okay, go ahead. Marcus, Scott, do you have anything to add? Oh, one other thing I would like to add. Tim Trumble wanted me to make sure that I had this straightened away too. We were talking about certain things when it came to because we were talking to somebody about 5 years ago, and it was Tim, or it was Mark Lowe, or it was Douglas Trumble, or it was a combination of the three. When Tim was talking to Douglas Trumble, what had happened was I had gotten that mixed up too, and it was one of those guys that were offering NASA to do the lunar orbiting film, the digital tape reels on the 900 machine. One of them had one of those machines, and he was going to do it. And I had gotten Tim's mixed up with when he was going to do a video for Stephen Greer, the ufologist, and Greer turned him down. And I think perhaps Scott and myself got that mixed up because Tim said absolutely not. He didn't have anything to do with it. So I wanted to make sure that got straightened away too. But it was someone. It was it had to have been either Doug or Mark maybe, because they're the only two guys that would have one of those machines. And NASA, like Jared said, NASA didn't have any of those machines because they were all taken apart. So,
Yeah,
anyways,
I believe perhaps when it was being discussed, I mixed up Tim and Douglas Trumble.
yeah, it could be. Just that I want to make sure that was straightened away
It's
as
just
well.
that NASA wasn't the only people out there with the equipment.
No, and like
Yeah,
Jared
both
said,
doing
they
it.
had jambled all this together in that McDonald's. They had pieces of this and pieces of that, and they were putting it together in that cabinet. So anyway, Jared, go ahead. You were
Okay, testing, just making sure this works. Is this
that's
better?
perfect. Yeah.
Okay, don't you just love
I
technology?
just want to
You know
clarify
they can get
something.
Oh,
For
well,
the people that are making comments, what Jarrett was talking about the thrust of the rocket engines. I was just doing a little thing out here to help explain it. The fact of a rocket thrust in space compared to being in the atmosphere. Okay, you do have thrust against the atmosphere that is helping push the rocket forward. As you're going up through the atmosphere, that thrust is actually decreased, but then the drag of the rocket, because you're in thinner atmosphere, is not present. And as you go farther up, the gases are able to release more efficiently from the rocket. So the efficiency of the rocket increases as the actual thrust that you're getting slightly decreases because you're not pushing against the atmosphere. The overall effect is an improved performance of the rocket in space.
You can even prove to yourself that the rocket works in space just by going down to the launch site. When you first see the rocket take off, the plume that's coming out of the rocket appears as this straight column thing. But as it reaches the upper atmosphere and eventually reaches space, that column starts to expand out into a cone. As soon as you see the cone, you know that the rocket's functioning in a vacuum or a near vacuum. Anyways, back to this topic about the lunar orbiter pictures, right? So I've been following the Lunar Orbit Image Recovery Project because I was very keen to know about, I hope you heard the quote that I read out from this book, which I can do. Did you hear it, or did I read it? Shall I read it again for you? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I had read the in this book here, where was this section? Lunar Orbiter, here we go. Okay, this is John Noble Wilford, the New York Times reporter, who's basically written this entire book just literally hours after Apollo 11, supposedly returned from the moon. He writes here about Lunar Orbiter here. He says, the photographic system built by Eastman and Kodak Company incorporated a wide-angle lens and a telephoto lens. The camera shutters operated simultaneously so that each exposure produced two pictures, one medium-resolution shot and one high-resolution shot. In the medium-resolution pictures, objects 8 yards square, about the size of a boxing ring, showed up clearly. The high-resolution lens picked up details as small as the top of a card table. And so that demonstrates that NASA knew what the lunar surface looked like in advance. Keep in mind, these probes mapped the lunar surface, 99% of the lunar surface. They mapped it down to 1 meter resolution. Okay, so they knew in advance what the surface would look like, and they actually used those pictures to build models and props, which they use for training purposes. And so, who's to say they didn't, use those pictures again to make accurate sets and props in their moon sets, future-proof their hoax, essentially. People like to claim, we've got post-Apollo pictures that show the same surface features, the same craters, the same hills, and this and that. Well, you're acting as if the Apollo astronauts discovered this stuff. This was already known what it looked like in advance before those missions. And so I was keen to see the Lunar Orbiter Image Recovery Project, and when I noticed your previous episode discussing the McDonald's, I felt compelled to write in with correction, and well, here we are now.
yeah, no, that was good. That was really good. That had to be brought up because there was too many people that were, saying things and this. So I wanted to really get that straightened away properly. The thing is that if I make a mistake or any of us make a mistake, we always will admit to it and say, look, we're not perfect. We make mistakes. As far as Marcus, Scott, and myself we're a little bit older, and that starts to happen when you get that age. So that happened, and we straightened it away. And that's, that's what I have to say. We're not trying to hide anything. And it's unlike some of these other fellows, like Faze and Crew and the NASA psychopath and all his little clique, the Bertie Bunch, as we're fond of calling them. They will never post a retraction when they get anything wrong. And that's what really bothers me. But hey, we do. And there's a few videos that I've taken down because of it. So anyways, that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, and that's the key thing. Like, if you can correct it, and I mean, it shows you that you're being transparent. You guys aren't hiding anything. I want to bring in Mr. Marcus Allen. He's been quiet. He is my hero. How are you, Mr. Allen?
I'm very, very, very well, thank you, Wheezy. Very good to be back on your show.
Always love having you. You are a legend. You're
doing good work, despite the rather unpleasant replies that some people give. Like, let's not mention names. There's no point.
No.
Just to continue with what Jarrah was explaining about the film, the vacuum on the moon is vastly greater than any vacuum that we can produce here on Earth in anything other than a very small container or chamber. The vacuum level on the moon is, as the technical term goes, torr 10 to the minus 12. That is a very hard vacuum. Torr is named, the unit used, torr, is named after Evangelista Torricelli, who was an Italian scientist in the 17th century who developed the barometer, or started to develop the barometer, so he understood about pressure. Now, there were two craft that used photographic film. I'm not talking about digital cameras, I'm talking about photographic film. The stuff that we all used to use back in the 20th century when photographic film was a major means of recording images in cameras. There were two craft that used photographic film. One we've already mentioned, that's the Lunar Orbiter, not to be confused with the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, which came in 2009. The Lunar Orbiter of 1966-67 used photographic film. So how could photographic film record images in that level of vacuum? It was orbiting about 30 to 60 miles above the lunar surface. So the vacuum level would have been severe. It was the film and the cameras were all held within a pressurized environment within the Lunar Orbiter spacecraft. And Scott has already identified the schematics of the Lunar Orbiter to show that that is correct. It was pressurized by nitrogen gas. The other satellite that used photographic film in space was the Hexagon Spy Satellite, known as the KH-9. That was only orbiting above Earth, but it was still in the vacuum of space. So it had the film that was used to photograph presumably Russian rockets and Russian ships and all the things that America wanted to see what was going on in Russia at the time, in the late 1960s, is photographic film. And the designer of the equipment used on Hexagon Spy Satellite, by the name of Phil Pressel, he worked for Elmer Perkin as a company in Connecticut, and it was a highly classified work that he was doing. He was only able to speak about it after it was declassified in 2011. And that was when I first started to hear about the use of pressure in order to maintain the integrity of photographic film. When I recounted this to Robert and to Scott, Robert said, right, let's get a vacuum chamber and see what effect the vacuum has on photographic film. And he went out and did that. He bought a commercial vacuum chamber. Unfortunately, could only record at that time down to about torr 10 to the minus 3, which is more or less where the space shuttle operates now. And we put photographic film in it and exposed it to the vacuum, which takes quite a while, because to get any vacuum, you have to pump out the air, and you've got to remove all the air, or as far as you can, to get the level of vacuum. You then take the film, which is as near to the original Hasselblad used films as it was possible to get. And having put them in a vacuum, we then put them in a camera, and Robert took pictures with them. And guess what? The color balance of the film was completely shot. The fogging of the film was very noticeable. Fogging is reduced contrast on film, so the vacuum had an effect on photographic film. Now, that was confirmed by a very pleasant gentleman in Greece called Bill Demos, who works at a university in Patras in Greece. And he'd heard what we said about it. And because he works with vacuum chambers as part of his job, he decided to conduct a similar experiment and found the same result. So all these films all the pictures that we hear or watch allegedly taken on the lunar surface could not have been taken on the lunar surface, because they would be showing damage to the color balance of the ectochrome film that was used, or fogging of the film that was used. And there's none of that visible in any of the images, the 32,000 images which were allegedly taken on the lunar surface. So they couldn't have been taken on the lunar surface. They had to have been taken here on Earth, almost certainly at Flagstaff in Arizona, or possibly at Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico, where it was known that a replica of the Apollo 11 site was built and observed by President Johnson at the time, and many other senior Apollo or NASA senior administrators and scientists. James Van Allen was present at that time as well. So there is a considerable body of evidence now building up which demonstrates that photographic film cannot be used in a vacuum without damage to that photographic film. The only way to protect it is to put it under pressure. About 2 pounds per square inch is all you need. So if you have the ability to pressurize the film in a spacecraft, which they did on the Hexagon Spy Satellite, the KH-9, and also the Lunar Orbiter, they were pressurized. The film on the Lunar Orbiter was developed on board the craft using a very similar system to the Polaroid system, because Edwin Land, who's the developer of the Polaroid camera system, or film system, was present during some of the consultation about the creation of the Lunar Orbiter. The film was developed using that Polaroid type system. It was then scanned, and as we've been discussing, it was then transmitted to Earth, and the transmission was then reassembled to produce the photographs which we now see. So the photographs didn't come from the moon in the way that we've seen them. The transmission of the electronic scanning did come from the moon, allegedly. And there's no reason to believe it didn't, because it showed a great deal of the lunar surface, which we know is correct, because, as Jarrah has already said, they were able to photograph down to the size of a card table. That's about 3 feet square, relatively small. The same level of resolution was available for a satellite orbiting Earth, the GeoEye-1 commercial satellite. And there are many images available from that satellite which had the same level of resolution. And you could see, and it was using color as well. NASA don't appear to have color film these days. They only use black and white. So you've got these films from space above Earth. They're digital films, so they're not affected by the vacuum. And that's the difference. Digital films do not get affected by vacuum in the same way that photographic film does. and they show images with cars on Earth. It's 400 miles up, the Go1 satellite. It shows very great detail, much more detail than you would expect. You can see individual people, you can see cars, you can see if they've got sunroofs, so you know which way they're pointing. You get much more detail. I think Jarrah's already shown some of the pictures taken on the Sydney Opera House, and you see people. Yeah,
Yep.
Very clear they are.
Yeah, I've used those pictures in my articles. I've used them in my videos. You compare them to the lunar orbiter pictures. Sorry, the lunar reconnaissance orbiter. Now you got me confusing the two. You compare the GeoEye-1 pictures with the lunar reconnaissance orbiter pictures. It's a night and day difference. The GeoEye-1 has vastly more details, and that's despite the fact that it's higher in altitude and looking through an atmosphere.
Yeah, it is, which is the difference. And the alleged photographs of the Apollo missions photographed by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter in 2009, which everybody gets so overexcited about, say, oh, look, there's Apollo on the moon. You can see the footprints. Yeah, I've heard of Photoshop too. Prove it's not. Of course they want to show that they've got Apollo on the moon. Now, people will say, well, the Chinese would have blown the whistle if they couldn't find Apollo. They've never shown any photograph of Apollo on the moon. All the Chinese have said is that we saw traces of Apollo. It's not the same thing at all. Traces of Apollo could be any of the rockets which were crashed into the lunar surface. And we know that several of those were. So the idea that the Indians, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Israelis, who've all reached the moon with unmanned craft, would have seen the Apollo missions. No, they wouldn't. They weren't looking for them because they weren't there. So the idea that vacuum has a serious effect on film is scientifically demonstrated. And if anybody contests that, I want to hear your evidence. And so far, we haven't heard it. We've had a lot of assertions. Oh, it's not possible. Of course they landed on the moon. They had all these reflectors on the moon. And we fire lasers at them. Well, they're not doing that anymore, by the way. The funding has been withdrawn from the Apache Point Observatory Lunar Landing Equipment, which spells Apollo. That's the McDonald's Observatory in Texas, I think it is. I don't know where McDonald's Observatory is, but they're not doing it anymore. Surely we know how far away the moon is, because you can fire radio signals at it. They'll bounce off. Lasers were being bounced off the lunar surface by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in 1962. The Russians were doing the same the year later. So the idea that you had to have a man to put this reflector on the moon is just nonsense. You don't need a reflector. You fire the laser at the moon, you get a signal back.
Oh, by the way, Marcus, you're talking about the reflectors. Well, here's something to think about. We were discussing about the levitation of the dust on the lunar surface, how when the sun strikes it, it levitates. Yeah, and when the sun goes away, let's say, it falls back down. So what about all the tracks, the lunar rover tracks? What about all of the boot prints and everything? What about the lunar laser reflector? Well, even though it's on an angle, after 50 some odd years, it would still have some kind of a charge on it. Those mirrors would be at least filled with some dust. So how are they going to get a return?
Well, they're not, because they don't need a mirror on the moon to get a return.
No.
It takes a long time to get a signal back that can be identified. It isn't the same as just, like shining a torch onto a wall, you get a reflection back immediately. You fire a laser at the moon. Sorry, go on.
I just wanted to give some update information there. There's two observatories that you mentioned here. The McDonald Observatory is in Texas, as you said, and the other one, there's Apache Point Observatory, that's in New Mexico. I just wanted to update that.
All right. And I think the funding that they used for a while was $125,000. And a few years ago, that was withdrawn. Hence the Mythbusters visit to the McDonald's Observatory to try to boost some publicity for them. Didn't seem to work because they showed fake images.
And then, oh yeah, that's right. And here's another thing you were talking about. About the about vacuum. And we have vacuum. Now let's just take a look at something here, because I've had this question come up quite a few times. You have a vacuum chamber down here. Now, let's take a look at the one that Bill has. Okay, he could take it down to torr 10 to the minus 6. After that, he needs a metal seal, a one-time use metal seal. Now we go to the lunar surface, where the vacuum is, like Marcus said, torr 10 to the minus 12. And yet we don't see any metal seals being used. We see rubber seals being used. In fact, the one around the CM door, it is a thermal RTV, that red sealant, that red rubber RTV that they put around there. And that's what they said. We looked that up, remember? It was RTV, that red RTV they put around there. So it's just, my question is that, are these two different environments? Is a vacuum down here not equal to a vacuum up there? Especially when water boils at the same altitude in the same places when we take the vacuum level down. So why? Not even the mighty Phase 52 can answer that question. He says, oh, well, yeah, it's the same place. Well, then why do they need one-time metal seals when they are above torr 10 to the minus 6? That's my question. I don't have an answer for that. I guess some more research would have to be done, because it seems no one else does either.
Yeah.
Well, maybe now we should start answering some of the questions of the chat. We've talked quite a bit about the lunar orbiter pictures and the retroreflectors and all this. And I notice there's a few comments in the chat. There's this one here which I would like to address. Jason Delano, he says, how did 400,000 people keep the secret? Well, first of all, 400,000. This is a common question that's asked. 400,000 people, they don't need to be in the know. When it comes to the people who are in Mission Control Center, they just they look at their computer screens and they make decisions based on the readouts. They don't need to know or care where the data comes from. Okay, and as for that, that data is simply transferred over telephone lines from the tracking stations. Okay, in the simulations, they actually just simply disconnected the feed from the tracking stations and put in simulated data. The simulations were such that they didn't know the difference between the training and the real mission. They didn't know it was real water exercise. And as for the people at the tracking station, I think it was the Russians who demonstrated on Zond 5. They demonstrated that to fake a mission to the moon such that radio operators would be fooled, they simply sent a probe around the moon, which transmitted cosmonaut voices. The cosmonauts were actually at the Crimea tracking station. They transmitted their voices to the spacecraft. They had a jumper wire connecting the receiver and the transmitter, so that when they transmitted their voices to the spacecraft, it rebroadcasted them. And the people on the ground, they initially thought the spacecraft was manned. And so I actually had this conversation with people who are at the NASA tracking stations. I asked them, how do you know that that NASA didn't pull a Zond 5 on you? How do you know that you weren't receiving signals from this unmanned probe that was simply relaying voices from Earth orbit or even the surface of the Earth? How do you know that they didn't pull a fast one on you? They just don't have any explanation for that. And even if we wanted to entertain your idea that 4,000 people, 100,000 people would need to be involved, well, let's entertain that idea.
He was
but let's entertain this idea anyways and stuff, right? How many people do you think were involved in the Soviet N1 program? There were thousands and thousands of engineers who built the rocket. There were thousands of Soviet military officials who saw those launches. They had 4 tests of this rocket. Each test turned into a disaster. Okay, and did the Soviets? What did they do? They pretended they were never involved in the race to the moon. They said, "Oh, What race? We never had this gigantic rocket to intended to send people to the moon. We never designed that sort of thing. That's fake news, as they would have said today. But it was only officially revealed after the fall of the Soviet Union that they did indeed have this N1 rocket. Okay, and well, people, when you're living under militaristic jurisdiction, that kind of helps with the silence. Okay. Anyways, anyone else have anything you want to say along those lines?
Yeah, I would say that this figure of 400,000 people who can't keep a secret is continually trotted out by people trying to dispute what we say. Now, I think the figure of 400,000 is a serious underestimate, because those 400,000 people all had families, or most of them would have had families, husbands, wives, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, who would all have been interested to hear what was going on. So I think that the figure of the people who were involved is nearer 2 million, which is a considerably greater number than the famous 400,000. Or some academic over in the UK said it was 411,000, and it would take 3.5 years before the truth came out. That was his investigation into conspiracy theories. Well, it did take about 3 years to come out, because Bill Kaysing published his work in 1976, which is just on 4 years after Apollo 17 had finished. That was December 1972. Bill Kaysing published his work, and that's the book, as Bill Kaysing's work, We Never Went to the Moon. And that title came from a conversation, as I understand it, conversation that Bill had with a Vietnam veteran who was really upset at what was going on in Vietnam. And he said, well, look, why don't we just piss the American government off a bit and say, we never went to the moon? And Bill said, oh, that's a good title for a book. I'll use that, which he did. And of course, that was part of the idea behind that famous film, Capricorn 1. Except it was Mars, not the moon, but they were using the lunar lander as a prop in it. There we go. That's the one. Well done. You have a good research library there, Jara.
Yes, I got stacks and stacks of books and videos, and yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
This one actually was given to me as a gift from J-Cats, who has his own podcast. I've been on his show twice. He had a garage sale recently. He literally gave me this as a gift for all my efforts in disproving the moon landings.
That's great. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
for the
I wanna
rest of
ask
us
a
that
question.
don't have that library, I guess we'll just have to read Nexus magazine.
Thank you. Thank you, Scott.
Hey,
Yeah,
I want to give a quick
coming
shout
out.
out. Oh, whoops.
Sorry.
Mr. Allen. No, I just want to thank everyone that's come out on both of our YouTube channels, a rare stream from my channel. And the people on Rumble have come out, and the people on Rockfin, my lovely Rockfin folks. I wanted to ask a question by Tinker, who left it on Twitter. She wrote, apparently her comment was too big to leave. So here's part one. Let's see. Part one from NASA.gov. It is important that electrical leads inside ultra-high vacuum systems must be insulated by means of non-outgassing materials. Leads should be limited to ceramic beads. This is part two. Since all of the elastomeric type insulating materials outgas a considerable amount in vacuum systems, was this part of the build on Apollo, or did they just call themselves out? That is a question by Tinker, who left it on Twitter. Anyone want to take a stab?
Yeah. Sorry. Could you repeat the question again?
Yeah, I only
sure.
heard part of it too.
Can you hear me right now? Okay, so part one. It is important that the electrical lead. This is from NASA.gov. So she shares some parts from NASA.gov and then ends it asking a couple of questions. From NASA.gov, it is important that electrical leads or LEDs inside ultra-high vacuum systems must be insulated by means of non-outgassing materials. Leads should be limited to ceramic beads. Since all of the elastomeric, I think, is that correct? Elastomeric type of insulating materials outgas a considerable amount in vacuum systems. Was this part of the build on Apollo, or did they just call themselves out?
It's a good question, actually. Good point. Because there are unmanned craft that have been to the moon. They've been to Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, and they're all inside the vacuum. I actually went on a guided tour to a satellite manufacturing company in the UK, and I asked them more or less that question: how do you protect a satellite from the vacuum of space? They say gold is one of the things that we use in the electronics, and it's also, the technical term is hardened. The equipment is hardened, i.e. hardened against a vacuum. And it's very easy to do it for mechanical craft, unmanned craft. The real problem is protecting humans from the vacuum. We're very delicate little creatures, us humans. We don't like low pressure. Our blood tends to outgas or boil, and we'll die if we're in a vacuum for very much more than about 20 seconds. So humans have to be protected. Unmanned satellites do not require the same protection, but they do require protection against outgassing, and that is quite easy to do. There are many materials which can be used quite adequately. I mean, that's why fiber optics is so useful. Fiber optics are basically light traveling through fiber connections. That's how most people get their satellite signal from, or their TV signal. That's why it's called cable, because it's basically protected against many of the things which would damage metal cables. So yeah, it's a good question. It's relatively easy to answer. The hard part to answer is, how the hell do you protect humans under those conditions? That's very difficult, and it hasn't been achieved yet. Sorry.
I was just going to say, we mentioned on one of our previous shows how I had to design a spacecraft to land on the moon Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, and you were talking about radiation hardening. One of the things that I had to look into when I was designing this probe was how to shield the instruments from the radiation, because the moon Europa is right in the heart of Jupiter's Van Allen belt. And so any probe that you're going to be landing there would have to have some significant degree of shielding. In fact, I propose this putting all the instruments and the electronics and whatnot in this big box, essentially, this big titanium box, if I recall correctly, to try to shield it from the radiation.
Yeah.
And so...
Well, it's the same effect on humans. Us humans are not designed to live in a radiation-heavy environment. That's why we live on Earth under the protection of the atmosphere and the magnetosphere. Get us out into space, and we got no protection unless we take it with us. So where's the protection in the spacesuits? They're prancing around on the moon in these spacesuits developed 60 years ago. When I asked them that, I actually asked the manufacturer of the spacesuit, a company called Hamilton Standard in Connecticut, and they said, we designed them according to the specification given to us by NASA. You must direct your question to NASA. So I did. I asked NASA the same question. I'm still waiting for the reply. That was 20 years ago.
Mr. Allen, you got to go. Come on, come get it.
Come and
get it.
Yeah,
I had a similar conversation once when I actually contacted the people from Hasselblad. I actually asked them if I could get a Hasselblad 500 camera. They're literally the same models that they had on Apollo. And I said, I'm sorry, the only models that we have were left on the moon by the astronauts and stuff. So if you happen to pass by, just pick up one of them.
Of course, there would be some cameras returned on Apollo 13 if that had been for real, which it wasn't.
Okay.
Yeah. Now,
I'd just like to cut in here a little bit on the vacuum.
Sorry,
as far as that question was given, right? When you look at the fact that, first of all, we have no way of reproducing a vacuum level of 10 to the minus 12 to do that type of testing that the space environment is going to be in. So we would have no way of knowing what the outgassing effects would be at that level. But we also know from 10 to the minus 6 on, you're going to be affected by cold welding. Okay. And none of that was addressed. When you look at every switch in the console of the LEM and the CSM, right? Those are, when you look at the diagrams and the details of that, those are simply stainless steel switches on there. They're going to cold weld themselves together. And especially when you add a bit of energy to them. So you're putting through an electrical field through that at the same time, it's going to enhance the cold welding. So you're going to flip the switch on, boom, it's not going to work. And both of those craft experienced a full vacuum when they did EVAs.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, as soon as they opened the door.
As soon as you open the door, all those switches are going to cold weld themselves together. Simple as that.
Yeah.
Okay. And they couldn't have tested that beforehand because they can't reproduce that level.
Yeah.
I just wanted to respond to CCG's question here. They say Artemis will supposedly refuel in space. How, whether liquid or hypergolic, it's not going to float where you want it to in 0G. It's important to realize that these propellants are under pressure. You see, it's a pressure system. So, you have turbo pumps and whatnot. That's how you pump the propellants into the combustion chambers and whatnot. And as far as the refueling goes, it still remains to be seen whether or not that's a viable option. So, and based on the latest missions with the Starship, it demonstrates that he can't even get the thing into orbit. It's when you do what's the most bitter pill to swallow is if you actually do the rocket thrust equation, the Tsiolkovsky equation specifically, which basically takes the natural log of the initial mass over the final mass of the rocket. You could do the equation for the Starship. You find that it has enough propellant to theoretically it has enough fuel to get into orbit, but it can't even carry a banana into orbit. It barely can reach suborbit. And if you actually look at the gases that's coming out of the Starship, you see all the green gas. That's signs of the stainless steel engines actually cannibalizing themselves, which demonstrates, these rockets aren't ideal for the job. And so it's the whole Elon Musk, he promised us a modern day equivalent of the Nova rocket. What he's delivered is a modern day equivalent of the N1. Then even calling that's rather generous because it can't even get into Earth orbit, which is what the original N1 was intended to do, obviously.
Yeah. And it's very strange that the Starship, Elon Musk's Starship, uses, I think it's 32 engines, which is more or less the same as the number of engines on the N1. That's the Soviet N1 rocket. And they had the same sort of problems. The thing blew up.
Yeah, 4 times, was it?
Yeah, or creatively.
4 times it exploded.
Yeah, was it creatively disassembled? I think that's the phrase used. So,
rapidly disassembled.
That's the one.
Rapid unscheduled disassembly, I think it is. RUD they call it, rapid unscheduled disassembly. That's the term for these things. And yes, the Starship, it has 33 engines in the first stage alone, whereas the N1 only had 30. Similar amount of engines. It's often been described as a plumber's nightmare, and that's no exaggeration because you look at all the tubing that would have had to go into manufacturing this many engines on the first stage.
Yeah. But
Jera, Aquilara Fox had a question here. Says,
Okay.
yeah, what's your opinion in the capabilities of the gyro guide systems and the capabilities of measuring coordinates in Earth?
Measuring
I
the
put it
gyro
in-
system.
Yeah.
Well, there are two ways to guide a spacecraft. One, of course, is with gyros, and the other way is with the thrusters, of course. And well, they've done many spacecraft with gyros and many spacecrafts this way in Earth orbit in the past. So I don't think that's a topic of contention. So yeah. Let's
Hey,
see.
I wanted to make a
I misread
quick little
your
comment.
question. You were talking about. Let me see read this again. What is your opinion on the capabilities of the gyro guide system and the capabilities of measuring coordinates in Earth? SI related to the capabilities of the fine correct. No, I don't have any opinion on that particular question. I don't see how it could be a topic of contention.
All right, so I wanted to make a quick little comment. Some of my particular listeners are just diving in, and you guys are miles ahead. So sometimes some of the talk can go over their heads, for people that are just new and dipping their toes. So I would like to bring up some basic questions for those new listeners that are just coming in, so because it could definitely get overwhelming. So let's bring up some of the more common questions that people will bring up. For example, some NASA apologists will often say, when you tell them, why haven't we been back in 50 years? Well, there's nothing to go back for. We went there once. There's no reason in going back. My usual response to that is that's absolute nonsense. You can find tons of minerals in space, and that any of these billionaires or people with money, if they could tap into those vast minerals out there, you can bet your top dollar they'd be up there, and yet we can't do it. How would you folks respond to a NASA apologist that would say, well, we've already been there, there's no reason to go back, that's why we haven't been back in 50 years?
Well, I can think of several reasons to quote go back. One, of course, is to build a base on the moon, so you can actually get some more prolonged hardcore research in, actually, doing some studies of the rock and the environment in situ. And of course, you mentioned things like mining on the moon. A lot of people don't realize this, but the polar regions, right? They have about, I think the numbers is 1.6% gold for every kilogram of rock you get on the South Pole. They've actually detected that with unmanned missions. A lot of the gold, it comes from, it's all the gold we have on the Earth is mostly delivered by meteoritic impact and stuff, and it's obviously to be much more prevalent on the moon, where we have all these craters and whatnot. And they always say, oh, we need to use the moon as a stepping stone to go off to Mars. Well, you think, back in the 60s, there was reports, we could have bases on Mars, or missions to Mars by the 1980s, by 1981. Obviously, that never happened. And they say, well, we don't. It's expensive. We don't have the technology to do that. To that, I argue, there's been all these proposals throughout the 80s and the 90s. There was even though the N1 failed, they had a different rocket. There was the Energia, the one which launched the Soviet version of the space shuttle. That had lunar applications. There was proposals to have one launch a mothership and one to launch the landing craft. Send 5 people around the moon, 3 of them land. But that idea never got off the ground. The American shuttle had something similar planned, where they had a Apollo-style space capsule with landing legs basically in the shuttle bay that would be launched into orbit, and then they would have a Ariane 5 or a Titan rocket basically carry up a Centaur stage, which would dock with, and they would use the Centaur to send it out to the moon. Right? That was, I believe, it was called Early Lunar Access. That was proposed, but cancelled under the Clinton administration. And they've been pushing ideas that the Artemis and even before it was called Artemis, they had, what was it called? It used to be called Constellation. The idea was that they would have the first missions to the moon by 2015. and it was 2020. They keep pushing the dates further and further into the future. Now there's talk of potentially even canceling the Artemis mission altogether and just going head off to Mars instead. And so it's crazy what's happening, right? He's obviously, in fact, even the Zonde programs, which sent extremophiles around the moon, tells they're very highly radio resistant and whatnot. The mission that went around the moon, that was literally a stripped down Soyuz spacecraft launched by a Proton rocket. The Proton and the Soyuz are still in service today. Well, has Russia, never, made a circumlunar mission of their own? Why haven't, especially with all the talk about, space tourism and this and that, all these instruments in space, you'd think they would have done something like that by now. But obviously the reason, it's not because of money, it's not because there's nothing else to find up there, it's simply because they don't have the means of shielding the astronauts or the cosmonauts from this kinds of radiation that's going to be up there.
Yeah, exactly. I played in the past the video of Neil deGrasse Tyson saying on one of his shows that his co-host was asking, it's stupid to say we never made it to the moon because if we wanted to, we could go back tomorrow. And Neil deGrasse Tyson says, well, we once could make it to the moon, but we no longer are able to do it. And then we've touched on this before. So if you've already heard this argument, because you are a hardcore Apollo Detectives follower and you've been following for a while, I completely understand that you guys already know you guys have heard this. This again is for the newer folks that are just starting down this path. But recently, and I believe Dr. Raza, shout out to Dr. Raza, showed a clip of from that guy from Get Smarter Every Day, where he was talking about the amount of rockets required just to send one goddamn rocket to the moon. First they thought it was, and it's been a while since I watched it, but I think first they were talking about 3 rockets, then it went to 7, then it went to 8, then it went to 12, then it went to 18. Now they're talking about 20 plus rockets to get one friggin' rocket to the goddamn moon. And this Artemis program was supposed to take off recently, and what happened? Postponed yet again. These are things that you guys have all covered in depth, in your awesome YouTube channel. But we get new listeners and new people that are just coming in. So I don't want the whole conversation to be stuff that they don't understand. We're gonna lose people like that. So every now and then it's good to bring up some of these easier questions.
I can explain why you would need 20 rockets for Artemis in very simple terms. You see, the Artemis rocket, the Starship, it uses liquid propellants. Liquid, basically, in this case, it's liquid oxygen and liquid methane. Okay, to remain liquid, you need to keep these propellants chilled at negative 200 something Celsius. Okay, extremely really cold. Okay, and so when you're on the launch pad, you have all these air conditioning units. You you can see all the frost building up on the rockets and whatnot. They're basically trying to keep the liquids in, trying to keep the propellants in liquid form. Okay, because if it gets too hot, it starts to turn back into a gas, and you've got to vent that out the spacecraft. Okay, when you're in space, you're not going to have any of those air conditioning units that you had on the launching pad. And so if you allow the propellants to remain inside the rocket, what's going to happen is they're going to start to, we call this gas, and you've got to vent that out the spacecraft. Okay, so when you consider if they can only launch something like 4 rockets a year from the Texas launch site. Okay, and I imagine when they get around to launching from Cape Canaveral, there'll be a similar limit as well. Okay, when you consider the amount of launches they can launch per year, the Starship, okay, and the amount of time the fuel would have boiled off in space. Okay, you're looking at something like 20 rockets, 20 tanker refueling rockets, just to account for all the propellant that you've lost from boil off.
Yeah, well, Tony has a good question here. I can't remember if you guys did that, Jared. Did you do that? Who calculated to see if there was enough fuel for Apollo 11 to get to the moon? Now, didn't Werner von Braun, didn't he say that it would require a few refuels to do that?
He was proposing in the beginning. He was proposing a Earth orbit rendezvous mission, which is basically where you take all the different rockets to. He actually had 2 proposals. There was direct descent, and then there was Earth orbit rendezvous. Okay, in the direct descent mission, you basically have the one rocket that will go all the way to the moon and back. You're basically carrying the landing propellant with you to the surface. You're carrying the heat shield. You're carrying this. You're carrying that. Okay, and so that's then as a result, you need a gargantuan rocket with with Earth orbit rendezvous. You have one rocket either launched empty, and then you have another rocket to send up the propellants, or you assemble the rocket in space, then you send it out to the moon. In that case, you're still bringing the heat shield down to the surface of the moon. The idea with Apollo was that they would basically send a smaller craft to the moon, dedicated just purely for landing on the moon, and don't worry about that; that is expendable. Whereas all the return stuff would be kept in the mothership. The problem arises when you consider that you need to shield them from the radiation, and so then you're back to needing a gigantic rocket again. So it kind of defeats.
Did they have enough fuel to make it to the moon? What do you think about that?
Oh, that's another kind of question you just asked off the top of your head. You got to use the Tsiolkovsky equation to calculate that. I've heard I've done some calculations off the top of my in the past, if I recall correctly. The numbers. The idea is that you would plug in the exhaust velocity and the initial mass of the rocket and the final mass of the rocket. You would plug that into the equation and see how fast it travels to what's the final speed of the rocket. And the idea is you want to get the spacecraft such that it's traveling fast enough to enter orbit. In lunar orbit, it's something like 2 kilometers per second, and in Earth orbit, it's 8 kilometers per second, if I recall correctly. And so I had done the calculations. The numbers seem to have checked out. But as I said, if once you need when you consider the heat shield, the radiation shield that you would need, you would end up having to add that to the rocket, and then you'd have to add more fuel as a result of that. And so ultimately it defeats the purpose of lunar orbit rendezvous.
Yeah, because it's interesting.
I think the initial, Robert, the initial from von Braun was 11 launches. Was his initial.
Yeah, I remember something like that. Yeah, it was quite.
It was 11.
It wasn't that
in the beginning. They were
anchors the size of the Empire State Building, didn't he say?
That's for the direct descent. That's for the direct descent one. He said you would need a rocket. Yeah, he said you would need a rocket something like 3 times the size of the Empire. No, it was 3 times the tonnage of the Queen Mary, and it was about the size of the Empire State Building. Okay, and because as I said in the beginning, they were thinking of direct descent, but of course, when you consider the amount of shielding that you would need for the mission, you're back to needing that gigantic rocket in the first place, and so. It defeats the purpose. In fact, when he favored, this is kind of funny. When he favored the Earth orbit rendezvous, they proposed they have a space station built, something like 2,000 kilometers altitude. I forget the exact numbers at the top of my head, but he was proposing to have this gigantic space station, this ring station where they would assemble the rocket. But when he made that proposal, the Van Allen radiation belts, they hadn't been discovered yet, and so it turned out that the orbit he was proposing would have put the astronauts right in the heart of the belt, which is not ideal for assembling a spacecraft to go to the moon.
Well, that was the same thing when you were looking at the radiation data on those charts. Look how many solar flares occurred during 1956 all the way to 72. That was crazy,
exactly,
and some of them were pretty big, and yet Jay Windley said that there were no flares of that magnitude at that time, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, he claimed there was no major solar flares during the Apollo program, but those documents I sent specifically cover the major solar flares, and he basically was arguing that none of them are proton events, which the data that's listed in those charts focuses on X-ray and H alpha data. The X-ray data will actually tell you whether or not the flare is what do they call them? They call them C class, M class, and X class. X class are your most powerful kind, and your M class are your moderate, and your C class are your minor flares. Okay, or as far as radiation hazards are. Okay, and so you can actually use the X-ray data to determine which is which. And so interestingly enough, right, the flares from the 1970s, they all seem to fall in the X class category. either the X class or the M class category, which is astounding. Okay, and I actually tracked there was another paper by Shea and Smart, if I recall correctly. They listed all these flares for which the proton data is available, and I found that two of the flares from Apollo 16 actually fall in that category as major proton events. And I did the calculations, and it ended up being something like 10 rem for just that one flare alone. The flare on what was it, April 18, 1972, if I recall correctly. You can read about that in column 5 on Ollis.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it was 6. Was it 6? Column 6, or was it 5?
I think it was 5. 6 was did James Van Allen change his mind, or was it changed for him, if I recall correctly? Let me just check. Bring that up. I've written so many over the years. Yes, column 6 was the Van Allen article, and column 5 was the solar flare article. In fact, I'll send that in the chat right now. Maybe we can look at that. Let me see.
Yeah, when you get to building rockets, though, there's a scale that you can work with on diminishing returns.
Hey, Robert, could you close down
the
your
size of the rocket to the percentage of payload that you're getting? And I think Musk has already achieved that with his thing. He couldn't even make it to space without a payload, with his beautiful Starlink rocket there, right? The larger you build it, the less return you're going to have for payload on there. Like when you're looking at 1,000 pounds of fuel for 1 pound of payload, right? But when you build the rocket larger and larger and larger, just the weight of the rocket and fuel, you eventually get to the point where you simply don't have any room to put a payload in there because you can't go anywhere, right? And that's been demonstrated.
Now, I sent my column 5 in the chat there. You can bring that up, and we can discuss that if you want.
Oh, from the Ollis website? Okay.
Yes, correct. It's in the private chat just there.
Hey, Robert, when you can you minimize your share screen windows that are still open that we already played?
You want me to minimize? How do you minimize?
Or close them down?
Just remove them?
Yeah, if you can, please.
Okay, we'll do.
Awesome.
Yeah. Actually, just one point about the getting to the moon with all the fuel. The only fuel that a rocket would need is the ability to get into escape velocity, which is the speed required to overcome the power of gravity. And for Earth, that is 25,000 miles an hour. Once you reach that speed, you can shut your rocket engines off and you'll coast all the way to the moon, assuming you're pointing in the right direction. By the time you get to the moon, you're traveling at about 2,000 miles an hour, which is why the 250,000 miles to the moon takes 3 days, because you're slowing down all the way to the moon. Once you get into lunar orbit, you'll then be accelerated by lunar gravity, and you'll reach a speed of about 6,000 miles an hour. You don't need any fuel to do it. You may need a little bit of fuel to correct your direction, your trajectory, but not to drive the rocket to the moon. You need fuel to get off the lunar surface. Once you get off the lunar surface, you get to the point at which Earth's gravity takes over, and you'll be pulled all the way to the moon, all the way back to Earth.
That's an excellent point, Marcus. It's an excellent point. It should be emphasized here. I always forget to mention this when I'm discussing rockets and space travel and whatnot. But a lot of people don't realize this. But real life space travel, it doesn't work like you see in Star Trek or Star Wars, where you don't have to constantly keep firing your rocket from point A to point B. Because for the most part, you just accelerate yourself into escape velocity and let yourself drift the rest of the way towards your destination. That's basically the idea with space travel.
Yeah, and once you come back to Earth, you enter Earth's atmosphere at 25,000 miles an hour, the same speed you left at. You then got to slow down, which is why you need your heat shield on the command module. Now, if you come straight in, the Earth's atmosphere starts at about 60 miles above the surface. You can't just come straight in and whack, you'll hit the ground and you will be flattened and you won't be around to say what happened. You have to come in at a very, very acute angle. It's about 6 degrees, 6 to 6.5 degrees to the Earth's surface. It's very precise. You'll then go slowing down through the Earth's atmosphere for about 1,000 miles, maybe more, 1,200 miles. That's why you need the heat shield. Now, there's a big debate about whether you use direct entry, i.e. come straight in and slow down from the speed you enter the atmosphere at 25,000 miles an hour, or you use skip re-entry, where you come in and you bounce off the atmosphere, remove, like skipping a stone across a pond. You'll remove some of the speed that you're coming in at, and you can then re-enter at a lower speed. Apollo used direct entry. They never claimed to use skip re-entry, which is what the Soviets used. That's why you need the heat shield. Now, the problem with the heat shield is it gets very, very hot, and its purpose is using ablative material, which is material which will destroy itself and protect the craft behind it. The problem with Artemis, we found, is that the heat shield very nearly failed. The pictures of it show enormous holes in the heat shield. There weren't any astronauts on board. There were the two famous dummies, Helga and Zohar, who were recording the radiation levels, which had never been released, but that's another story. So the heat shield on the Artemis program, the first time it's ever been used was in December 2014. That's over 10 years ago. And they still can't get the heat shield to work.
Well, no, you see what they said in that article there that we were going over. Well, yeah. the heat's being trapped between the shield and the outer casing of the ship.
Yeah.
Well, how come it worked on Apollo?
Oh, it worked on Apollo brilliantly, obviously, because 6-7 times they came back from space and the heat shield worked every single time. They seem to have lost the formula because they keep trying to produce new heat shields, and they got to test them before you put humans on board. And if they don't work, well, they're rather going to expose themselves. Now, there's a problem with this heat shield. We've all heard about it. The heat shield is on the lower part, the wide part of the command module where the astronauts are. And it comes in, and most of the time when it's going to the moon and when it's orbiting the moon, it's attached to what's called the service module, which is a cylindrical, quite a large cylindrical body of equipment that supplies the electricity through the various components. It's basically a storage thing, but it has to be attached to the command module. And the way it's attached to the command module is with steel bolts, or possibly titanium bolts. They hold the command module and the service module together, but the bolts have to pass through the heat shield. So when they separate the craft as it approaches Earth, the service module is discarded and goes into orbit around the sun or whatever it does. It disappears or burns up, or anyway, it's not required, so it's discarded. And the only way they can separate the command module from the service module is to use explosive bolts to separate the two craft. Well, that will leave holes in the heat shield. We know what happens if you have holes in heat shields. You'll get what happened with Challenger, the Challenger space shuttle. It will disintegrate. And the Columbia. Yes, Columbia. Challenger was something different. Yeah, the Columbia craft, which broke up over Texas. Eventually parts of it landed in Texas. That's what happens if the heat shield does not function. So in order to protect the craft with the explosive bolts having gone off and the separation between the titanium bolts holding the two together, is you have holes in the heat shield which have to be plugged. And they have something called compression pads. That's the same as on Artemis. They've used compression pads. And ironically, on Artemis, if you see the pictures of it having just been recovered from the ocean, it didn't return to Earth at lunar orbit return speed. It didn't go far enough. This is the December 2014 mission of Artemis. You'll see that it's completely covered in heat shield. The whole craft is covered in heat shield. Similar to the space shuttle heat shield tiles, which are on the lower part of the space shuttle, it covers the whole of the Artemis, or it's called the Orion capsule, that's Apollo 2.0. The whole thing is covered in heat shield. Why? If Apollo didn't have them, and they didn't, and Apollo even had 4 handles on its external surface, so astronauts presumably could clamber out and hang on to the spacecraft and recover the film from the service module. That was the purpose. But those aluminium handles on Apollo, there are 4 of them, did not get burnt off. Now that is a bit of a giveaway because the temperature of the plasma generated by the craft as it enters the Earth's atmosphere is way above the melting point of aluminium, which is 600 degrees centigrade. The heat generated was at least 2,500 degrees centigrade. Why didn't these aluminium handles get burnt off? Because they didn't. You can see them I've seen them on the Apollo 10 mission, which is held in the Science Museum in London. You can go and look at it. But all the photographs of other Apollo craft, Apollo 11 through to 17, including 13, which we might discuss if you'd like, are still there. It's the giveaway to show that those craft did not go into anything other than low Earth orbit, or the aluminium handles would have been removed by the heat. And why didn't Apollo have heat shield all over it like Artemis does? There are so many questions, and so many anomalies, there's so many unexplained details about Apollo. We could go on.
Yeah, there's one right here. Tony is asking, he says, well, if that's the case, Marcus, then how did it manage to lift off with nearly empty fuel? Well, what was nearly empty? Now, are we talking about the LM, or are we talking about the rocket when it took off and started to separate in Earth's atmosphere?
I don't know. When it took off from the moon, it didn't. The only thing that took off was the upper section of the lunar lander. It's in 2 parts. The lower section had most of the fuel and the landing engine, and the upper part had the astronauts and the ascent engine. That engine only required it to go up to about 6,000 miles an hour to meet up with the command module, which was orbiting the moon. That's the story we're being told. Then it had to then accelerate itself out of lunar orbit, which is only about 1/6 of the gravitational attraction of the Earth. So it didn't need very much fuel to do it. Once it gets into lunar orbit, it gets to the point called the neutral point, where the Earth's gravity and the moon's gravity are equalized. And once it gets to that point, it's attracted by the Earth's gravity, so it doesn't need any fuel to get there. It just needs fuel to get off the moon. So it doesn't need very much. It was actually quite a wise decision to do. I forget the name of the guy who suggested it. Werner von Braun was very dismissive initially until he worked out all the difficulties that would be involved.
I think the guy who suggested it was, I think his name was Hobart, if I recall correctly. Hobart.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, or Woody Woodpecker said it's downhill all the way.
That's about right. Yeah, it would be. It is downhill.
I would like to add to what you were just discussing. This actually goes back to what the person asked about having enough fuel to get off the lunar surface and everything. The Chinese they've retrieved some lunar rock of their own, and they're Chang'e spacecraft, the Chang'e 5, Chang'e 6, it's been described as being Apollo in miniature because it has essentially a mothership and a little lander craft that basically, they enter lunar orbit and they undock, and then the lander goes down to the surface of the moon, drills up some rock samples, and blasts off the lunar surface and reunites with the mothership and transfers the samples, and it's the mothership that goes back to the Earth with the rocks. And so obviously it's very, very scaled down, so you don't need to worry about bringing tons of radiation shielding with you and stuff if you protect humans would, because obviously there's no humans and stuff like that. But it basically it demonstrates that the small craft can land on the lunar surface and have enough fuel to get off it again. And those rocks have since been analyzed, and they've turned out to be very different chemically to the Apollo samples, which is kind of telling in its own right. And there was something else about that spacecraft I forgot off the top of my head right now. But it's interesting to note that we were talking earlier about the Zonde 5, how they initially duped the Americans into thinking that the spacecraft was manned. Well, I have no doubt. There's no doubt in my mind that had the Chinese transmitted voices to the Chang'e 5 spacecraft as it touched down on the moon and drilled up all these rocks and what, had they transmitted videos and voices of their taikonauts on the moon, and that probably relayed those signals, nobody would have been the wiser. And hey, they would have had heaps of rock to show for it too.
You mean bits of rock like this? That's a piece of moon rock, guys. Prove it isn't. It looks exactly like a piece of moon rock. Yeah, a piece of moon rock.
Yeah, I would like to get back to the article that I was about to show. It's just, if you can put that back on stream again, Wheezy.
Yes, sir. 1 second.
Yeah.
Yes, J. White, column 5. Okay, yeah. So I went through all the different solar flares that had happened during the Apollo missions, and in addition to the comprehensive flare index for major flares, right, I found this one paper by Shea and Smart. If you scroll down a bit, scroll down further, you can actually see what I'm talking about. Scroll further down, no further. Okay, here's some readouts from the mission. Here's some readouts from all the satellite missions that were in space at the time of the Apollo 16 solar flare. And if we scroll further down, you'll be able to see the actual fluxes. No, a bit further down. Than that. Here we go. There we go. That's one. That's the one. Yes. Now this is a table from Shea and Smart's paper. They have listed all these solar flares for which the proton fluxes are available. Okay. And the stuff that I've highlighted in yellow, that's the solar flares that occurred during the Apollo 16 mission. We see there is 30 million protons per square centimeter. Was it square meter or per centimeter? Per square centimeter. Sorry. Yeah. So we see there's 30 million particles per square centimeter for 10 MeV protons, and 7.8 million particles per square centimeter when it comes to the 30 MeV protons. And so I did the calculations. If you go just below that, you'll see the calculations that I've done. Yep, there we go. We see them. So, I've calculated the. Basically, I've taken the fluxes, plugged in the energy levels, and I've done calculated how much energy would have been deposited into the astronaut's body. This is our absorbed doses. So we find that we get about 1.32 rad for the 10 MeV protons and 1.03 rad for the 30 MeV protons. And then we basically add those together, and then we multiply it by the radiation weight factor, and it turns out to be 11.75 rem for that one flare alone. Okay, and so obviously they claim they didn't receive that kind of radiation level, so obviously something's wrong there. Something's very wrong. The data, it's a mathematical certainty. This demonstrates that they should have received a much higher radiation dose than what was reported. And this is not even considering the doses that they would have got from passage through the Van Allen belts, or any other flares that they would have encountered. There was at least, I think there was something like how many flares was there during Apollo 16? There was something like I can't remember the top of my head, but there was actually, I got this down to conclusion here. I said, in conclusion, the claim that no major solar flares occurred during the Apollo missions is demonstrably false. taking only one mission, Apollo 16, we have demonstrated that of the 144 detectable flares that were recorded by NASA between April 17 and April 2027, 5 were the largest X-class solar flares, and at least 2 of them were major proton events. But the propagandists don't care to look at that closely.
Well done. Good point. Good point.
All right. If you guys don't mind, I want to bring back a more simpler point, a little question that all the veterans will already know. But again, we do get new listeners all the time. And I don't want the show to be completely, something where it's so technical that they're just going to tune out. So let's bring it back to something a little simpler. So some of these NASA apologists will bring up as another reason as to why we haven't been back is because of NASA budget cuts. And if you bring up the fact that you could simply bring up the NASA budget for the last couple of years, and it's in the several billions of dollars, and they will often rebut by saying, well, there's more programs and stuff like that. It's frustrating because I'm like, NASA is supposed to get us back to the goddamn moon. What are you talking about? More programs and things along those lines. How would, if you guys want to give a brief answer to that, because these are common little things that come up when you're going into the NASA questioning the whole moon landings and such.
Well, certainly I'd like to get into that myself.
Yes, sir.
We as human beings are fascinated by beautiful stories. We like stories that trigger our imagination. And of course, space travel is just one of those very things that go there. But if you quit believing the story that they're telling you, the only thing you'll have left is the reality. Okay. And the reality is we're using the same old rockets that are going absolutely nowhere. Okay. We don't have any new technology to improve on that. The vacuum of space, the radiation of space, okay, the amount of consumables that we need to take along with us to keep us alive are incredible. It's incredibly dangerous to take off in a rocket. I mean, once you fire those things up, you can't shut them off, right? And we see them blowing up on the launch pads all the time. That's the reality of it. The fascination that they keep doing is they want to keep triggering your imagination. And I believe that's all very good and fine for people if you want to educate them, if you want to get them interested in science and technology and stuff like that. That's a nice way to trigger it. But they have to keep it. This is a story that they're telling. It's not reality. And like I said, you take away the story. If you stop believing the total story, the only thing you'll have left is the reality. Okay. And the reality is you can watch Elon Musk launch a rocket unmanned. It doesn't make it to space. It launches unmanned. It doesn't separate and blows up. Okay. Or it simply blows up on the launch pad and takes everything else with it. Right. That's the reality. Okay.
Yeah. No, and the other thing is, so Mr. Marcus Allen, you know very well of the late great David McGowan's work, and one of the things that fascinates, and if anyone's interested in that audiobook by David McGowan, it's called "Wagging the Moondoggy." Find me on Spotify, Apple, iTunes, whatever podcast player you want. And if there's a search feature, just put in "Wagging the Moondoggy" by David McGowan. It'll pop up. It's a audiobook about 5 or 6 hours. And David was a genius in many ways. He's a hero of mine. And one of the things that he was great at was how if there were inconsistencies with the official narrative, for example, and things didn't make sense. Why stop there? Why not question the entire event itself? So if we have this NASA issue where we haven't been back in 50 years, and there's excuse after excuse, the moon rocks are complete nonsense. Reports of petrified wood passing off as moon rocks. There's so much nonsense with just the stories alone. Why is it wrong to question the actual quote unquote historical fact or event that man landed on the goddamn moon? It's only logical to question the entire event, and that's what David McGowan was a genius in. He would point out the little parts to it that were completely absurd, and so if these little things don't add up, why the hell should I take at face value everything else of the story? You know what I'm saying? And so, and I'm only saying this, it's not, I hope I'm not preaching to the choir. I'm saying this for the newer folks that are just dipping their toes in and maybe on the fence, if you will. You know, you have to ask yourself these questions. Why the hell haven't we gone back in 50 years? Technology has improved vastly in these decades preceding, and everything gets cheaper. One of the excuses that we get is that it's a budget issue. And let's just look at the television progress in let's just say in 2006, to get a 720p plasma television, a little freaking 20-inch television ran you almost $1,000 in 2006. Nowadays in 2025, you can get a freaking 60-inch television, freaking 8K, 100K, whatever the hell they have these days, for $500. And so if you are new or on the fence, these are the questions you have to ask yourself. How the hell does it make any sense that everything vastly improves technologically wise and gets cheaper, and yet it's a budget issue why we haven't been back in 50 goddamn years? I'm sorry about that rant. I just had to get it out there for the newer folks. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'll just tell you something. If I took you into a museum and I showed you a Model A Ford, and I told you that it's self-driving, okay, and it's faster than a Bugatti Veyron, okay, and the person says, can you take it out and show me? Well, we don't have anybody available that knows how to start this thing anymore. That's the story that you're getting. That's the same as walking into a museum and looking at, you know, a lander from Apollo, right? It's there. The command module's there. They've reconstituted all of the command center. They've put that up so it's full simulation, everything else, right? They so-called took a F1 engine out of the ocean that Bezos put up there. They put it back together and test fired the thing, right? These machines have the heat shields. They so-called have all the electronics. They've redone all of the original computers on everything like that. Well, then the thing is, if that's the stuff that worked, show us. Take it out of the museums and show us. Just like I said, take that Model A Ford out of the showroom and fire it up and show me that it's faster than a Bugatti. That's all.
Yeah, simple.
Right? Because they're claiming this equipment is so much better than what we have today.
Oh.
And that's exactly that's a very good comparison, right? Their heat shields worked, their computers worked, their radiation protection worked, right? We even have that one document where they updated the Windows on it, right? When then we look at that.
Actually, I just to go back to what you said, Wheezy, about Dave McGowan, the website on which wagging the moon doggy is available is called Center for an Informed America. Get it? CIA?
CIA.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Center for an Informed America.com. It's run by his daughter. Dave died a few years back. But
Mr.
it's
Marcus
worth
Allen, you would be pleased to know that one of my buddies, he's listening in on the live chat. Shout out to Chris Graves. Chris Graves is in regular communication with Dave McGowan's brother. And so if Dave McGowan's brother is listening, shout out to you as well. I've said it on my show. That's one of my heroes. You are too, Mr. Marcus Allen. You are another one of my heroes. Yeah, no, I don't take this for granted. You know, the opportunity to have you fine gentlemen in here, Scott, Robert Williams, and the rest of the, whenever we do these Apollo Detective shows, we mix in our crowds. It's the regular folks that tune into your channel week in and week out. But with my folks, it's not folks that are fully, haven't fully listened to a lot of these shows. So that's why I want to bring in some easier questions to answer, and maybe some of the more common questions for people that may be on that fence. You know what I mean? Because I think for us, it's so clear that the moon landings were fake as hell. There's so much shenanigans behind it. There's when you try to get an answer, you get this runaround and that runaround. That's why there's a joke. NASA stands for never a straight answer. But if you are new, it can be overwhelming, especially with the propaganda that we were given as children, that this was humankind's greatest achievement. And lately, I've actually run into another form of NASA apologetics from white supremacists. And a few people have left me comments saying that if you don't believe in the moon landings, it is anti-white propaganda. Because, of course, Nazi scientists built rockets to go to the moon. And if you deny that, you are denying European white supremacy. I'm like, wow, that's an interesting take to defend the NASA moon landing, which I completely and utterly dismiss as complete buffoonery. But
they seem to forget there were black people involved with the Apollo program. There was a whole film about the women of color who were involved in doing the calculations of the trajectories in the Mercury program, for example. I think the film was called Hidden Figures, if I recall correctly. So those white supremacists, they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah. No,
well, here.
Yeah.
I was going to say, here is another question. One fellow, actually, it was Galactic Goof. He says, space is cold and the moon has no atmosphere. Why would it be above survivability conditions in sunlight and cold where sun does not shine? For example, when they're using that far ultra camera, I believe it is, that camera that they use to take the star fields. Well, if you notice, they're in the shade, and then the astronaut that's walking by, he steps out into the sun. And then the other fella follows him, and then he's right back in the shade again to adjust the camera. Now, that's instantly going from hot to cold for 250 degrees Fahrenheit, I believe it is, to minus 250 degrees Fahrenheit. So how is that suit? How are the coolant systems in that suit, the tubes with all that water circulating or whatever it is in there? How is that cooling down and then heating them up instantly, just like that? Wouldn't it have to do that? Instantly heat them up if you're walking like instantly right into a cold like that? Or does it not work that way? Does anyone know that?
No, it's just very good film editing so that you believe what you're being shown. Now, if anybody wants to see how the Apollo films were created, check out Make Believe, Smoke and Mirrors. It's available on the owlist.com website. It's available on the Apollo Detective site. It was a film.
I redid that one. Redid it with narration and subtitles so you can actually hear what's being said.
Yeah, no, it was a very good explanation of what was going on. It's created by somebody, we don't know who he is, but somebody who had a great deal of good technical knowledge about photography, filmmaking, and the space program. Actually, one point, Wheezy, I think maybe we should explain a little bit to help your, shall we say, new coming subscribers,
Yes, sir.
is to put Apollo into the context of its time. Apollo was originally created as a program when President John Kennedy, in May 1961, got up in front of the Houses of Congress and said, "We will land a man on the moon and return him safely to the Earth." He said a few other things as well, but that was the start of it, May 1961. Now, what else was going on in America at the time, in the 1960s? Because that's the period of Apollo. It may be history to many people. It's not history to me. I lived through it. You can tell I'm old enough. What else was going on was the build up to the Vietnam War, which was getting very unpleasant. The space race between America and the Soviet Union, as Russia was called then. And the Cold War, which is a standoff, the nuclear weapons standoff between America and the Soviet Union. The Apollo missions were created in basically 1958, 1959, that's when they first started. But President Kennedy put them into context for the American people in May 1961. He repeated that at a bigger speech at Rice University in 1962. Anyway, Apollo was from a standing start, 1961, to the alleged landing on the moon, 1969, July 1969. They had to create everything that was required to land, they hoped, humans on the moon in a 7-year period, 1961 to 1969. Well, 8 years, if you like. That is twice as long as the Artemis program has been in existence, and they haven't got very far with that. Apollo did the whole thing in, let's say, 8 years. They had to build all the rockets, they had to build all the equipment, they had to train all the astronauts, they had to do everything. That big building we see down in Florida, the Vehicle Assembly Building, the largest, I think it's still the largest single building ever built. The 3,000-ton capacity crawlers that delivered the rockets from the Vehicle Assembly Building to the launch site, which is still in use today by Elon Musk to launch some of his rockets. So you've got all this going on. At the same time, the Vietnam War is killing thousands of Americans. 58,000 were killed in Vietnam and 3 million Vietnamese. That was being carried out. It was initiated by President Johnson, Lyndon Johnson, who was the senator for Texas, which is why most of the equipment for the control centers was built at Houston in Texas. That was the influence of Lyndon Johnson. President Nixon came into power in early 1969, elected in 1969, and he was able to talk by telephone, well, it was actually a radio transmission, from the White House, the Oval Office at the White House, to the moon. So it must be real. The president wouldn't lie, would he? Well, what happened to Nixon? He lied, got chucked out or resigned. He admitted that it was all a lie when interviewed by David Frost. So you've got the Apollo program going on right through the 1960s. It's basically trying to, the protests against the Vietnam War were ramping up right across America. There were many people who just refused to take part. Muhammad Ali, probably the most famous, who refused to be drafted to go and fight people he had no argument with. That was what he actually said. I have no argument with the Vietnamese. Why would I go and fight them? And a a lot of Americans did exactly that. A lot of them got out of it. It was a very unpleasant time in America because in 1963, President Kennedy is assassinated. The film of his assassination, the Zapruder film, wasn't seen in public until 1975, when it was released by the Church Committee investigating it. So people didn't actually know what had happened. They'd heard the stories. The Warren Commission is just a whitewash event, as many people are now beginning to discover. Robert Kennedy, John Kennedy's brother, was also assassinated in 1968. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Malcolm X was assassinated. America was falling apart. It needed a good news story. Apollo was to be the good news story. Whether they could land on the moon or not was totally irrelevant. They had the ability to create the faking of Apollo landing on the moon because they'd practiced it a lot. Of course, you're going to practice and simulate what you're doing it. And it was all filmed and recorded. And that was what was more than likely used to persuade the American public that America had landed humans on the moon before the Russians. Hooray, we've done it. We've beaten the Russians to the moon. That was the good news. It didn't happen. It was a fake. It was fraud. It was propaganda. It was using the American enthusiasm for technological advancement against them. America are a very can-do society. I'm British. I live in the UK. I admire America in many ways. They do a great deal of good in the world. They also do a lot of harm in the world. And that hopefully will be adjusted when the new president, number 47, takes office in about 10 days' time, on January the 20th, just before my birthday. How fortunate is that?
How old will you be, Mr. Allen?
Say again?
How old will you be?
How old do you think I am? Tell me.
I believe you look like, I wouldn't say a day past 28.
Oh, you're so kind. You're quite right, of course. Just turn that figure around. I'll be 83.
83. Congratulations, because 83 years old, and you are sharp as a tack. You debated MC Toon and whooped his ass.
Yeah, that was fun. Yeah.
So my dad's in his 70s, and unfortunately his cognitive decline is already showing. And when I see you, Mr. Allen, and I speak with you, I'm in awe with you just, your comebacks are on point. You're on top of it, and can't give nothing but respect for that. And I'm also honored, to call you a friend in many ways, yeah. Mr. Allen. It's always awesome to have you on and get your perspective. Now, I will say I am a skeptic on these political things. As an American, I think it's all a stage. I don't want to get too much into it because I know we're on YouTube and Robert might not like us going that way. But yeah, I definitely agree with the points that you were making as far as the climate of the 60s, in which so many things were going on. And so as a newcomer to questioning the moon landings, you have to take your mind back. Even, I'm 40 years old, so that was before, a couple decades before my time. But you have to try and take your mind back to a time where there was still segregation going on, yeah. Where you had JFK assassinated, you had Malcolm X assassinated, you had Martin Luther the King assassinated, you had RFK, you had Fred Hampton. All these crazy events. Even though I wasn't born, I've read the stories. I've immersed myself, so I can try to put myself in that situation. A very hectic era, for lack of a better term. And then you have the Vietnam War, which in my opinion is what really got Martin Luther King killed. Once he started speaking out against what was going on in Vietnam, whoops, he's out. And so this is the way I view it, and I think we view it very similar, Mr. Allen, is that we had to fake the moon landings, because someone in the chat made a comment, said that they sincerely believe that the effort was made, but then when they realized that they couldn't make it, they had to fake it. I agree with that sentiment. Maybe there was an honest attempt to make it, and when they found out they couldn't, they had to fake it. Now, a movie came out a few months back. It's called Take Me or Fly Me to the Moon.
Yeah.
And that movie was great in so many respects, because they essentially, it's almost like an admission that we never made it to the moon, that they had to fake everything else. Now, the conclusion of that movie, and cover your ears, this is a spoiler alert, but the conclusion of that movie is that, well, actually they did make it, but because they didn't have the film, they had to fake it, which is absolute nonsense. Because again, why the hell haven't we been able to make it back in 50 years? So that's a silly thing. And I feel like the movie people had to put that in so as not to piss off the powers that be too much. You know what I mean?
I have some comments I would like to say about that, as a matter of fact. First of all, the idea that they would have to fake. First of all, I apologize for my lack of visuals. My camera seems to have died on me. I have no idea what happened there, so you'll just have to see a still picture of me for the rest of the show. But anyways, when it comes to this Fly Me to the Moon film, right, the premise, what the hell? Oh, fuck.
Hey, right, we can hear you.
Okay, my screen just died on me.
Damn it.
My screen just died on me. Hang on. Okay. Oh, Jesus, mate. Hang on, technical issues. Okay, I'm back again. No idea what happened.
Jared, let me suggest that if you have other applications running on your computer, I would close them or minimize them at the very least, so it doesn't interfere with your connection, because you are in Australia, so that could overload your bandwidth. So I would recommend leaving
I've only got the Firefox open, so that's weird. Anyways, with Fly Me to the Moon, the premise that they were trying to do of that, we had to fake this footage to in the event we can't get real footage. Well, where's the logic in that? If you actually look at the news coverage of the Gemini missions, and later on during the early phases of the Apollo missions and stuff, whenever there was no video coverage available, they would always cut to a studio in either shot by CBS or NBC or whoever. They would have models of the spacecraft. They would have actors in spacesuits basically acting out the actions, and it would be synced to the audio, and they would have a nice little disclaimer at the bottom saying this is a simulation of what's happening in space. So the idea that they would have to fake the footage if they can't get anything back, that doesn't make any sense. I found the film to be a bit of a propaganda piece, and in fact, the space news article space.com, they published an article about this movie, and they tried to push the infamous S.G. Collins film, in which he claimed that it was impossible to fake the slow-mo needed for the moon missions. S.G. Collins here published a video that went viral some years ago, in which he claimed there were no high-speed cameras available, that the disc recorders work. I actually released an article, I think it was column 3, in which I debunked this crap. I demonstrated that you wouldn't need to store the entire thing on the disc recorder. The disc recorders in those days could only store about 30 seconds of footage. All you would need to do is, would film it on a reel of tape, okay, then feed every 30 seconds into the disc recorder, and then transfer it to a slow-mo playback. Collins actually agreed with me. Oh, that's a good idea. I don't think that's how they've done it, but that's a good theory. That's theoretically possible. He doubled down on his claim that we need high-speed cameras for the later missions, and ironically enough, he actually said, I know there was a system, the Videologic Instar system, that could overcrank, but it was in black and white. Well, I looked into the specifications. No, that camera was capable of both black and white and color. So the entire point of his viral video is mute. Okay, and so I actually posted a comment on space.com, under response to their article. I said, no, that the claim that you can't fake it, that claim that it's impossible to fake is wrong. Here's my proof. Right. Eventually the comment was up. then they deleted it and they blocked me from commenting on their website any further. So that demonstrates to me that it's a propaganda piece, and they're pushing this propaganda.
Yeah.
Now,
100%. Now, I want to share again. This is for the newer folks that may encounter these kind of questions. One thing that you will hear often from NASA apologists, as I call them, is that, oh my gosh, well, if it was fake, the Russians would have said something. Well, I present Exhibit A. This is from I Love Fucking Science. This is for all the science geeks out there, a legitimate publication by just to be clear. This is an article published in May 9th, 2023. Title is Ex-Russian Space Chief Claims NASA's moon landings were fake. Holy shit. Well, that debunks that little rebuttal that NASA apologists love to use.
Yep.
Let me read a little piece of it, and I'm only reading it for the folks that listen to this on podcast format, which is my bigger audience there. The former head of Russia's space corporation, Roscosmos, and renowned ranter Dmitry Rogozin has taken time out from the invasion of Ukraine to share some conspiracy theories about the U.S. moon landings.
Oh, good.
I
love a good conspiracy theory.
Yeah. So you can see, but this is great because this is from a website that is mocking these claims. But this is what you would call moving the goalposts, because the people that, the NASA apology will say someone would have talked. Okay, well, here's proof that someone has indeed talked and has indeed called bullshit on the NASA moon landings, and now they're trying to paint this guy as a Looney Tune, as a conspiracy theorist. That is called moving the goddamn goalpost. So continuing on, the ever provocative, look at the wording, the ever provocative politician took to Telegram to claim he asked for official proof of the NASA moon landings in 1969 when he was deputy prime minister of Russia, but he apparently only received a copy of a book by cosmonaut Alexei Leonov. When President Vladimir Putin handed him the top position at Roscosmos in 2018, he asked again and was accused of undermining the sacred cooperation with NASA. I also received one angry call from a high-ranking official accusing me of aggravating the international situation with my doubts, he said. It was not clear to me how the United States, at that level of technological development of the 60s of the last century, did what they still cannot do. Looking at Rogozin's dubious track record, it's safe to say his latest flurry of incendiary comments is an attempt to sow disinformation and take advantage of prominent conspiracy theories. So you can clearly see the slant in this hit piece only because a top Russian cosmonaut has called bullshit on the moon landings. So again, if you didn't hear it the first time, this is the third time I'm saying this is a classic example of what is called as moving the goalpost. And they are moving the goalpost using ad hominem attacks against this guy because he is not going with the official narrative. Any thoughts, gentlemen?
I actually brought this episode up with Mike Mullane, the astronaut, when I debated him last year. Was it a couple of years ago? I think it was. Yes, it was 2003. I think it was when I debated him. I mentioned. I brought this very point up, and I said, given the current state of political affairs with the Americans and the Russians, don't be surprised if Vladimir Putin starts saying something similar. And he was like, "Oh yeah, I'll believe him. Sure, yeah, right." So. The people they like to bring up the whole, the Russians would have spoken. You show an example of them speaking up, and they say, oh well, they would say that, wouldn't they? Because they're our enemies.
Yeah, and that's why I want to point out. Some people would have recognized that right away, but if you're new to this or you don't understand how some of these fallacies work, that is a classic moving of the goalpost, because they're asking for something, you present the evidence, and now, well, he's just a conspiracy theorist. Oh, we shouldn't take him serious. No, you SOB, you asked for this. You made the claim. I debunked that claim, and now you're moving. You're asking for further evidence. It's a joke. And so this is what you're going to get with many of these NASA apologists. So I wanted to bring this article. Like I said, I think many people that have been following both of our channels already know about this article. But for those newcomers or new listeners, there you go, because it's a common one you will often hear.
Yeah. There's another incident with Russia as well that I'd like to bring up. There was this viral video of Vladimir Putin being shown this AI analysis of pictures and videos and whatnot from not just the Apollo missions, but also from the various unmanned flights. And the AI indicated that the Apollo missions were faked, whereas the pictures from the Russians, and I think it was the Chinese as well, were real pictures. And Putin, he's reacting like, interesting, very interesting, which it goes to show, like I said, don't be surprised if Putin starts saying something similar. Given that the current situation is with the United States and Russia, don't be surprised if, okay, we're gonna, deals are off. Here's what we know about Apollo. And I would like to actually comment on something that Johnny Come lately posted in the chat. He says Apollo 16 April 72 flares, only 2 flares, both M class, not a prohibitive factor. Well, that's incorrect. If you actually look at the X-ray fluxes that are associated with those flares, you find they all fall into the category of X class. That's explicitly stated in my article. I show the actual tables, I show the actual numbers, and you can see that the flares during the Apollo 16 mission were X class. X class being the most powerful solar flares you can encounter.
Yeah, like the Carrington event of 1859, which was a major event and knocked out most of the electric telegraph cables at the time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I seem to be having a lot of technical problems here. Now my keyboard and mouse have stopped working. The only thing I got left is the touchscreen.
Somebody's getting at you, Jera.
Yeah, it's the CIA, the Center for an Informed America.
Yeah. Or the clowns in America.
Yeah, yeah. No, this is good stuff. Like I said, some of this stuff may be basic for the longtime listeners, but we have to remember that we have some folks that are just, coming into the fold. Maybe they're on the fence, as I was. I some of you have, may have heard my story. I was on the fence for a few years. Once I became awake to the fact that the government didn't always tell me the truth, and I had questions. That's when I first started hearing that the moon landings never took place. Prior to this, I had spent all my life in believing that the moon landings were indeed real and true. As a kid, and I have to imagine, as most kids, I had envisioned myself in space, jumping around, playing golf, as we see in the videos. And it wasn't until I started questioning the government that I started, all right, so here's some folks saying that we never made it to the moon. I was dumbfounded. I'm like, whoa, what are you talking about? This is historical fact. This is American exceptionalism at the grandest of scales. And once I started seeing the evidence, I'm like, oh, damn. Okay, let's take it all in. Let's break it apart. And I still remember the moments, during this process when I was questioning, okay, so did we make it to the moon or did we not? I live in Florida, and I went to Cocoa Beach. I went to the Kennedy Space Center. And I think the moment that helped me put my mind, so I was 50-50. Did we make it? Did we not? I think the moment was actually seeing the lunar lander replica at the Space Kennedy Center. And I was just there dumbfounded looking at this damn thing. I'm like, holy shit. You are telling me This thing that couldn't survive a typical yearly Florida hurricane made it to the goddamn moon and made it back with man. I'm not buying it anymore. And that's when I started getting off the fence. I started researching it even deeper and deeper and deeper. I became friends with folks like Dr. Raza, with my lovely friends right here that you see, this panel right here, with the great Marcus Allen, Jared White, Scott, Robert Williams. And I just, all these questions that I had were getting answered, and it made more sense. That's the thing. Whenever you have and this goes for anything, whenever you have questions, ask them. Find the answers. And if you already have preconceived notions of something and your questions are answered satisfactory, and they make complete sense, then continue on. However, if it changes your preconceived notions, then damn, you have to take a minute to pause and take that information in and let it sink in. I'm like, damn, what makes more sense? And this is what I had to do when it came to the moon landings, because like I said, I wanted to believe that we made it to the moon. I mean, it's such a cool story to think about, that from the time of the Wright brothers in the early 1900s, and only 50 goddamn years later, we went from essentially giant kites to rockets that took us to the moon. I wanted to believe that with all my soul. However, unfortunately, the evidence is not there for that. It isn't there to support that conspiracy theory. They call us conspiracy theories, but I call that belief a conspiracy theory. One of the things that I've said is NASA is the one that claimed that they landed man on the moon. The evidence to support that claim is flimsier than the lunar itself. Lunar lander itself. So when we talk about evidence, the onus is on those making the claim. Now, when they present their evidence and I evaluate it and it doesn't make sense, then I simply reject their evidence. So the onus isn't on us. This is something I brought up a couple of shows previous to this, where we have to change our attitude. We weren't the ones making the claim. It was NASA and their apologists making the goddamn claim. I choose not to accept their flimsy evidence, their goofy photos, their flimsy lunar landers. I choose not to accept it. I want harder evidence. I choose not to accept the convenient excuse that they lost the telemetry data for this. You see what I'm saying? And so we need to get, I feel, maybe I'm wrong, and I'd like to hear your thoughts, but I feel we shouldn't put that on ourselves. We shouldn't put the onus on our goddamn shoulders. The onus is on NASA, and we need to take it back. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a good point. And just in case anybody would like to delve more deeply into some of the reasons why this didn't happen, I happen to have a book published talking about exactly that. There's 29 chapters in it and 246 references on a dedicated website. So if you want to get into all the reasons why, say, the Russians didn't blow the whistle, how could 400,000 people keep a secret? What's the Kubrick horizontal? What are the fake Apollo suns? What's that about? They're just big spotlights in studios. The waving flags, we've all heard about the waving flags, haven't we? Oh, they don't wave on the moon, by the way. There's no atmosphere. There's no wind. They only move when somebody touches them.
Apollo 15.
Now, here's a question. Neil Armstrong is one of the most famous Americans who've ever lived. He was the first man on the moon, we're told. He died in 2012. Where is he buried? He's not buried. Yes, he's buried at sea. He was a naval pilot during the Korean War, and he could legitimately claim to have a burial at sea, which is what he asked for and what he got. He's buried at sea off the coast of Florida. Why isn't he buried at Arlington National Cemetery, as Gus Grissom is buried? Because he didn't want a fuss. He was basically an honest man, but he was also a military man, as were all astronauts. There could be an exception in Harrison Smith, who was a scientist, a geologist, but basically he was under the control of NASA, which is a government organization. All military men in America owe their allegiance to their commander-in-chief. When their commander-in-chief, the president, says jump, they only have one question: how high, sir? Other than that, they do what they're told. They obey orders. You'll fly to the moon and tell people you've been to the moon. Yes, sir. And that's what they've done. And they will not break ranks. They will not make their fellow astronauts look stupid by somebody coming along and saying, well, we didn't actually make it to the moon. They won't do that. I think only 3 of the moonwalkers are still alive. Now, we've all heard of Apollo 13, the great space rescue, we're told. What very few people are aware of is that the day after the launch, the official launch of Apollo 13, which was April the 11th, 1970, it was an Apollo 13 launched. The day after that, an Apollo command module was recovered from the Atlantic Ocean by the Soviet Navy, who were conducting naval exercises in the Bay of Biscay, which is west of France and north of Spain. It's an area of sea which is quite well known. It's quite rough at times. The Soviet Navy found this floating Apollo command module. Hadn't been reported missing. What was it doing there? Why hadn't anybody reported it missing? Was it missing, or was it the real Apollo command module which had to abort its flight because it was way off its official flight path? From Florida, it would fly out over Africa. And they would look out for the Eye of Africa, the Richat structure, so they know they were on the correct course. They would then fly on over Africa, down towards Australia, back up to America. That's the official flight path of any Apollo launch. So what was that command module doing floating in the Atlantic? And there are pictures of it on the Russian craft that recovered it. The Russian craft took it back to their headquarters at Murmansk, the headquarters of the northern Russian naval fleet. And 6 months later, in September 1970, an American Coast Guard cutter, the USS Southwind, was visiting Murmansk on an official visit. And the command module was handed over because the rule amongst space nations is that anything recovered from another nation's space program is to be returned to them. So the Soviet Union, as it was at that time, returned this command module to America. And there are photographs of it on the foredeck of the Coast Guard cutter Southwind, which returned back to its base near Baltimore. And that command module is now on display at the Grand Rapids Museum in Michigan. But it's sealed. Nobody can look inside it. It's sealed as a time capsule to be opened in 2076, the 300th anniversary of the founding of America. Quite an appropriate date. But there's another Apollo 13 command module on display at the Kansas Cosmodrome. What's going on? This is the only Apollo mission where 2 Apollo command modules are on public display. And there was a film made of it, starring Tom Hanks, directed by Ron Howard. It's a very good film. And that film was all filmed, every single frame of that film was filmed here on Earth. But it gives a very good impression of what it must have been like to fly in space. Make-believe smoke and mirrors would be your first port of call to find out how it was all done. So the question remains, what was an Apollo command module doing floating in the Atlantic Ocean, the Bay of Biscay, the day after the official launch of Apollo 13? Nobody has satisfactorily answered that. They've said things like, well, it was a boilerplate. It was a practice command module. Yes, there were boilerplates. This is BP 1227. Boilerplate command modules were used for practice of getting in and out if you're being recovered from the sea, but it hadn't been reported missing. You'd think something like a boilerplate, if assuming it was not the official Apollo 13 command module, would have been reported missing. It's a big piece of kit, weighs about 7 tons. Not a sort of thing you want to hit with any ship. And how did it get from Florida, presumably that was where it fell off a ship, to the Bay of Biscay without showing any form of marine growth on it? It would take about 8 to 10 weeks to drift across the Atlantic on the Gulf Stream. But no, it's coincidentally the day after the official launch of Apollo 13. So it's a mystery. And if people are not aware of that, they're not aware of the full story of Apollo. In the same way that Gus Grissom is buried at Arlington National Cemetery because he was supposed to be the first astronaut on the moon. That was the program. That was how it was set up. But he was killed by the ridiculous performance of certain technicians who decided to pressurize his craft in a practice session with 100% oxygen at full pressure. Of course it will explode if there's any form of ignition source. So there's a great deal that went wrong. They had to get it back on track to fulfill Kennedy's promise to land a man on the moon before the end of the decade. The Apollo 1 fire was January 1967, so they didn't have much time left. They had to get on with it. So if Apollo 13 was just an aborted launch, which is more than likely what it was, if you don't know that, you're not fully aware of all the Apollo anomalies, inconsistencies, and unexplained details, which you have to be. And if you want the full story, it's all in here, guys. The Apollo moon hoax, the real evidence.
Now, Mr. Allen, how can people, someone in the chat asked how they can get a signed copy by yourself.
Right. Then you have to send a request to us at Nexus Magazine. And if you go online, you'll find the address and the email for me on Nexus Magazine. You can do it online at nexus.magazine@btconnect.com. BT is British Telecom, and it's one of their main email. So you can send it there, and I will sign a copy. Delighted to do that, and send it back to you. It'll cost you about £25.
I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that, Mr. Allen. I want your autograph. That would be awesome.
Just send me your address, Wheezy. I'll make sure you get a copy.
Yeah, and I'm going to pay for it. I don't believe in freebies. So support my man, Mr. Marcus Allen. I'm definitely going to get into that book.
Yeah, that's the book you need because it answers all the questions that we've been asked in the chat, or most of them. You can certainly get it there. That's part of your education, guys, about Apollo. So if you're coming to it for the first time, if you're hearing it for the first time, and you see this idiot Brit wittering on about how Apollo was faked because you're American and you think it was real, okay, I don't mind. But read the book and find out the real facts.
Look at this comment right here by Alejandro Hernandez. Think how it must feel to die knowing you were part of a lie to deceive the world. And no matter how much you wanted to tell the truth, to ask for forgiveness, but your oath prevented you.
That's a
Dang,
very
I
good
often
point.
wonder
that's
what's
pretty
going-
deep. That's pretty deep.
I often wonder what's going through their heads, of the astronauts, what's going through their minds, And occasionally I wonder if it was agreed the last one alive would reveal it, or if they would all go to their grave and wouldn't be revealed until after their deaths, when nobody can be held accountable or called in for questioning along those lines. And I know that Bill Casing here managed to get in touch with Jim Irwin. He wanted to give him the facts about his Apollo 15 mission, and of course he died shortly after he got in touch with Casing. Now, I would wanted to address something else here. Someone posted in the chat, continuing about the solar flares. Johnny Come Late, he says, "No, Jer, I have the LDE catalog from," I'm probably butchering this name, Solokia, April 19, M3, April 25, M7. Check the SOLRAD data on NOAA's website. I actually republished the relevant information here. You can look at the 1 to 8 Armstrong max X-ray flux data. Okay, for it to be a X-class solar flare, it has to be greater than 0.1 ergs per square centimeter per second, and we can see 5 of them fall into that category here. I've got the flares from April 18, the flare from April 21, and April 27. Each one of them are above 0.1 ergs per centimeter per second. Okay, so that's X-class. Look it up. And we were talking. Yeah, I would also like to give a shout out to Ralph Renee's book. You can get that from ralphrenee.com. I've kept it in print since he passed on, and it's the latest edition has some appendixes added, including a essay on cosmic rays that was published posthumously. You can get that from ralphrenee.com.
Very good book it is. Highly recommended.
Mm-hmm. And if you wanted to see any of my videos, you can go onto White Jarrah. It's basically my surname before my given name. There's a story behind that. The original, somebody asked earlier in the chat if I was the one who produced Flagging the Gems. Indeed, I was. Flagging the Gems was a documentary I produced in which I demonstrated that the Apollo 10 television transmissions were all pre-filmed and edited together. As far as the views of the Earth far away goes, you can see I was actually looking at the transcript, looking at the videos. They would be in mid-speech, and the camera would cut to a different angle, right? And they would also cut the camera or black out between interior and exterior shots, is because they were either using a transparency over the window or a globe outside the window of a mock CSM, and they would always black out between interior and exterior videos of the astronauts floating around in the cabin. Right? They never showed a continuous shot. You can look at the videos from the ISS or the space shuttle. There are many videos showing the Earth outside, and in one shot they would show us the view outside the window and the view inside the cabin. But on Apollo, they would always black out or cut the camera. And of course, we had that slip up on Apollo 11 where we could see the interior light. We could see they had they were just using a transparency over the window. That was all covered in Bart Sabrell's documentary. Anyways, I produced my own video Flagging the Gems, which went into Apollo 10. It showed all these how they faked those in-flight transmissions. And Mark Gray of Spacecraft Films, he filed DMCA takedowns on the videos, even though they were public domain footage, and got my old account suspended. So the old account was Jarrah White. The new account is White Jarrah. And you can find all my Moonhoax videos there.
That sounds racist. Just kidding, Jarrah. I got a question for you. Jarrah, can you speak on the burn times for outbound TLI compared with Apollo 4's inbound boost to 25,000 miles per hour approximately? Same times for both, despite one being against the pull of gravity.
I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. I'm sorry to have to look at the records for that. I'm sorry.
No worries. I just wanted to read it since I didn't think you could see the screen, perhaps. All right, let's look at some other questions. Someone posted about Twinkies, like whatever happened to the Twinkies in space as they can't decompose in 100 years. Anyone want to comment on that?
Well, I think it's more than just the Twinkies up there. I mean, they had, Tang, all kinds of stuff. But what's more apparent is what they were doing on the simulated set in between their movie takes, right? There's liable to be beer cans and pizza boxes around. I mean, I've only found the beer can. So
golf clubs and golf balls, supposedly.
And Playboy bunnies, things like that they bring on this set.
So I'll be the one to bring up these newcomer questions and stuff, for them specifically. But that's another interesting point. And I believe David McGowan points this out. Like, these guys bring golf clubs. You had to have specific weight measurements and all this stuff, for a long trip, an epic trip, and you bring along golf clubs. And not only that, these guys, when we see the film footage, when you think of the gravity in space, that you could jump like freaking Superman heights and do these super powered feats on the goddamn moon, and yet they're just taking little hops stuff that simulates film being slowed down to produce that effect. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, actually, if you're actually looking at the 1/6 gravity that they're sitting in there, basically they could, given the strength of their hands, they could go up the ladder just with their hands straight out, with their arms straight out, and pull themselves up. Or they could just stand there and jump right up to the top of that ladder.
Yeah.
Like, no problem at all. If you were actually just messing around on the lunar surface, you could leapfrog over each other. And they could have been doing that, right? I mean, you mentioned they brought golf balls. There's golf balls everywhere on the set in all of the missions. Not just Apollo 14 when they so-called brought a golf ball with them and a golf club. They're everywhere on all of the sets. And I
just wanted to bring that up because people forget.
I mean, in the pictures before they get out of the lem when it's absolutely pristine.
So there were alien golfers, apparently, if we're to believe the official story. Yeah, that's the thing, because I only brought this up because some people will wonder, they're jumping around and shit. Okay, let's assume we were in the moon. They'd be doing superhero moves up there. Wouldn't you? If you were an astronaut on the moon and gravity being the way it was, wouldn't you be like, oh man, look how cool this is right here? We're doing it right now. And yet all we see are little skippity hops here and there.
Well, the reality is if you were actually had landed on the moon and it's your very first time, very first event, okay, you would be so overwhelmed and so concerned that all of that equipment that had never properly been tested in that kind of a vacuum or that kind of an environment, okay, you'd be spending most of your time checking your equipment, okay? You'd be discussing it with Houston all the time, every few minutes. You're going to be doing pressure checks. You're going to be doing oxygen level checks to see how much you have. Anything else you're going to be doing out there. And certainly you wouldn't be jumping and falling down and stuff just in case you tore that suit. You have no idea what's on that surface. Okay? Anything that's blown apart by meteor impacts, those rocks would be incredibly sharp. Incredibly 100%. Sharp. There's nothing to wear them down. There's no wind, water, anything to wear them down. When they're split open, they're going to be very sharp on their edges. Those would cut your suit, cut your gloves, cut anything, right? Okay? Right. It'd be sharp enough that if you walked on it, you might cut through your boot. You'd have to be very careful of what you're doing out there. Okay? You wouldn't be doing all of those fantastic moves. You could on a simulated site, with a little assistance. you could pull that off, right? And they certainly did that. Okay, all that messing around they're doing. But if you were really there, your heart rate would be up there like you were driving a race car.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not going to come down. The intensity of the landing alone would be incredible stress on your body. Something you don't forget, every time they did it, it's a different person. And that's their very first time. They've never flown this vehicle before in that environment. And I think I mentioned that once before. Where are the astronauts who had landed on the moon? They're the only experts if they actually did it. Why aren't they brought in to train the next crew?
Yeah.
They are now, like, it's the very first time they did it. They landed there. They handled the equipment. They have all of the knowledge that is available on this equipment and how it functions. Okay.
Okay.
Where were these guys when the next one's off? I mean, Neil Armstrong quit before the missions were over. He was already gone from NASA.
Yeah. So I want to acknowledge a couple things. I want to give a shout out to the Apollo detectives, especially Mr. Robert. Send a live chat through Odyssey. I did receive that. Thank you. If you are my audience, definitely go search the Apollo detectives on YouTube and give them a subscribe and follow. I'm proud to call them my friends. So thank you, Bob, for that. I'm going to use those funds and get Mr. Marcus Allen's book. So they will be recycled within our little ecosystem here. And then secondly of all, in the live chat right now, and we will do this for future ones, but let's try it out now. You know, the hell with it. I wanted to use a swear word, but I'm trying to watch my language. The hell with it. I will put the StreamYard link in the YouTube live chats. I will also put it in my Rockfin and Rumbles. If anyone has a live question and wants to ask it, hit that link. Now, if you will be a jerk, I will cut you off immediately. But if you got some serious questions, and let's keep it short because we are already hitting up 3 hours. So let's keep it short. If we can ask you a question, we will answer it and then move on to the next one. Let's see if we can take 2 or 3 questions. And then in the next installment that we do, we will try to open it up a little earlier. This is an experiment. Let's try it out now. So
I would like to answer Jason Delano's question about the burn times. I just looked these up. With Apollo 4, the TLI burn time was about 5 minutes, and for the other Apollo missions, it was about 6 minutes. But of course, Apollo 4 also had the about 3-minute firing of the CSM's engine, you know, to bring it back down and stuff. The Apollo 4 was essentially, for all intents and purposes, the Apollo equivalent of the original Orion flight, which just, you know, went into the Van Allen belt and then came back down again. So I just wanted to answer that question real quick.
And also, can we just appeal to any NASA supporter? Notice it was singular there. NASA supporter who might have some evidence to refute what we have claimed. I'd love to see it. I've been doing this over 30 years. I've yet to have that information. All sorts of ridiculous things. There's one famous example given that how they avoided the Van Allen belts. They had a polar exit from the Earth. That's the explanation given for how they avoided the Van Allen belts, which are radiation belts around Earth, 2 of them. But it couldn't happen because if you look at the official record, the TLI, the trans-lunar injection, i.e. the firing of the rockets to exit Earth's gravity, to achieve escape velocity, occurred over the Pacific, where you could see the moon straight ahead of you. That's what you do. You fire the rockets over the Pacific so you get towards the moon. That's the official explanation. But some idiots have come along with this idea that they avoided the Van Allen belts by going over a polar exit. Well, you wouldn't get to the moon that way.
The only way they would actually be able to launch a polar orbit would be to launch from California, at the Vandenberg Space Center, the Vandenberg Air Force Base, rather. But that's where they always launch their spy satellites into polar orbit. But of course, they didn't have any launch facilities at Vandenberg capable of launching something as big as the Saturn V.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I mean, that's where polar orbits start from, Vandenberg in California.
Yeah.
For an equatorial orbit, which is what is launched from Florida, because rockets don't have steering wheels, you can't just change direction at whim. You go where the rocket's pointed. If you want to change direction, it takes a lot of fuel, it takes a lot of time, and it's very complicated. So don't believe what people try to explain away some of the things that we talk about. We have answers to it all.
That's why it's called Apollo Detect. Ask us anything.
Yeah.
Ask us whatever the hell you want. I put the StreamYard in the chat for anyone still having questions or want to call in. Call in. Bring it in. Like Mr. Marcus Allen, the legend, would say, come on, come and get it. Bring your best evidence. This is the time. And it's time to wake up from these shenanigans. Like we stated earlier, when the next nonsense or screwery, to watch my language, happens, we will be okay. I'm not going to take it at face value. I'm going to question it, which is what we should always be doing. Question everything. So I did put the StreamYard in there for any potential callers. My buddy Chris Graves, who is friends with Dave McGowan's brother.
Oh,
Chris, what's going on, my man?
Hey, I'm trying to mute. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, bro. You're on the air.
Okay, I just had a question. Does anybody find it curious about the technology apparently with the moon buggy that kind of like it's kind of ridiculous. Like my friend Donald Jeffries, not to name drop, but he brought it up to me, and Dave McGowan, I think, even wrote about it too, about how the moon buggy technology has been lost to history, and it kind of resembled like on the Jetsons, where you literally would fold it up like a suitcase, that kind of thing. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Well, that's a good question, Chris.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, that moon buggy that was filmed, it's called the Lunar Grand Prix, Apollo 16, I believe. And you see the moon buggy driving away, kicking up the dust, going around. There's the Apollo lander in the distance, comes back again. That was a radio-controlled model. Because if you look at the astronaut driving it, he doesn't move. His left arm, which you see in the film, stays in this position, more or less level with his shoulder. It doesn't even bounce around when he goes over big bumps. He was a mannequin, a model. That lunar rover in that film, in my view, was a radio-controlled model. And if you see radio-controlled models today, which are filmed quite regularly, they do all sorts of extraordinary things. Yeah. And they look very real. Because it's very hard, certainly on the moon, it's very hard to actually judge distance, let alone estimate size. You have to take it on trust that NASA are telling you the truth. Well, if you don't take what NASA tell you on truth as the truth, you'll question it. Now, there are three things I believe in: Father Christmas, the Tooth Fairy, and the Easter Bunny. For everything else, I want evidence. Where's the evidence?
I would like to say some comments as well about the technology that are being destroyed. They said one of the official explanations is for destroying the technology is, oh, well, we have no longer need for it. There's no snowflake's chance in hell of the technology being resurrected or needing to, use this anymore. Well, first of all, you would think that all this amazing technology would have been, put in the Smithsonian or on display somewhere, or at the very least they would have made, backups of all the data in the event that they actually would need it in the future. Because like in fact, when they had the Orion spacecraft still, under development, because none of the schematics about the Apollo command module was available anymore, they had to go down to one of the museums where the only unflown Apollo command module is still on display, which incidentally wasn't intended to go to the moon. It was intended as a rescue vehicle for Skylab. They basically went there to take some of the panels off and find all the innards, basically to get the information they needed, because they didn't have any of the plans anymore. So there goes that excuse that they don't need it anymore. There's no point in keeping it and stuff like that. So realistically, the only logical explanation for why they would want to get rid of such technology is because it wasn't up to the task at hand, and so they wanted to basically get rid of that evidence.
Yeah,
That's awesome. Yeah, and Chris is a.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I had the wrong button pressed. Yeah, I just want to say, yeah, I know Dave's daughter Alicia. Alicia.
Alyssa.
Yeah, I did. I edited a show for her about 2 years back, and because she always laughed because she says, "Oh, my father, he always had this, like a Geo, he would always, stutter, or, he would always go like that, and it drove her crazy." So she sent me a video and said, "Could you please edit the sound and take all of that out?" So, but Dave's a good guy. He was a good guy, and so was his daughter. His daughter's really nice to deal with too. Yes.
His brother Craig doesn't get a lot of credit because I think that was by choice, but his brother Craig, I'm good friends with, and I talk to like at least once a week, and I'm really hoping he comes out from not hiding, but I hope he really does, because he's a real smart guy himself, and Dave was like Mensa level, so wagging the moon doggy every time I'm on a show, like for an interview or whatever.
So Chris, hold that thought. Chris Graves right here for you, my friends, the Apollo detectives, and for those listening, Chris Graves is a researcher. A lot of the big shows, like for example, Charlie Robinson, who is the author of The Octopus of Global Control, Don Jeffries, a historian. They consult with my man Chris Graves for this research. So Chris Graves, not to blow smoke up your butt, Chris, you and I have become real close friends.
Yeah.
Real good friends.
Yeah.
But I want people to realize, it's not just someone that doesn't know anything about any of this stuff. And the fact that you have regular communications with Craig is what I want people to understand. I mean, Dave McGowan for me is the GOAT, my hero. And I think that is so awesome that you have a good friendship with his brother Craig. So there's the little introduction that I didn't give you at the very beginning, Chris, man, but I want people to realize that Chris is not just some regular Joe off the street. No, Chris has been around the damn block.
I just want to keep Dave's memory alive, and wagging the moon doggy is what woke me up to the whole moon landing thing too. Because even though I went into things like 9/11, JFK Jr., on and on, I was on the fence about the moon, to be honest with you, and he pushed me off the fence. So I'm really grateful for, Dave McGowan, rest in peace. And thanks, Wheezy, for having me on, and everybody on the panel. You guys are awesome. So thanks.
Someone in the live chat from the Apollo detectives recognize you. Like, I've seen Chris before. So yeah, dude, I want people to know you are well known, and your research and work is respected. And I think in 2025, you and I are going to make some hardcore collaborations, man. We're gonna tear it up, man.
I look forward to it.
You already know firsthand. We don't have to get into it, but you know I got your back, brother. 100%, man. And I love you to that. You just went through a. So Chris, for those that don't know, I'm gonna say it right here. Chris was involved in a pretty freaking bad car accident. His car looks like he should have been dead. The fact that Chris is right here in front of us talking is amazing. And so, yeah, shout out to you, Chris. And if anyone wants to help, find Chris Graves, find his link tree. Any donations will help because unfortunately the medical system, he survived. But what happens after you survive? The medical hospital.
I don't mean to cut you off, Wheezy. I appreciate it. But like the medical system is filled with deception, just like institutions like NASA. So you got to question everything. Yeah. So,
yeah. I will say a couple of words about the medical system in the United States. It's virtually non-existent for all intents and purposes. I often got on the phone with Ralph Renee. He would often complain about his arthritis, how he's often denied healthcare coverage and everything. And I'll never forget this. The last thing I asked him, he said he felt like he was dying, and I asked him, I said to him, "How long do you reckon you have left?" And he said, "As long as I could hold out." A couple of days later, he was in a car crash which worsened his regular hip pain to the point he became an insomniac, and he basically left this world on his own terms. And
I won't lie to you. I'm in intense pain from my lower back right now, and I'm not going to do anything to myself, but I can definitely understand.
Well, I'll tell you, Chris. Yeah, I was in a plane. I lost my plane that I had in 1995, and I broke my back in 3 places. I lost my teeth. I was smashed up pretty good. And it took till 2007 before I could do a button up on a shirt. So now it's MS Content, a lot of that stuff every day, and I'll be in that rest of my life because the pain's so bad you can't do anything. So I hear you. I know what it's like. That back pain is just one of the worst things you can have.
And you can't get any rest. There's no rest. I can't sleep. Yeah.
No. As soon as you roll over on your back, that does it.
And I got a
plate. I like to add what I was saying.
My arm now too, so I can't lay on my side anymore. But anyway,
brother. Well, I would like to add one last thing to what I was saying before. Like a year after Renee died, I had picked up a copy of Michael Moore's film Sicko, which was a documentary about how they kept denying the American people healthcare coverage or this or that. And let me tell you, when I saw that documentary, I cried. Because I literally had deja vu of all the phone calls I had with Renee and how he would, constantly complain about the pain he was in, because this was literally vindication of everything that he had said. I was seeing it in real time, and yeah, I cried. That's literally the only words I can say in that regard.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, this has been great. I'm gonna get with you, Robert, and we need to schedule another one in a few weeks. I love these. I think people enjoy these as well, whether you have been going down this rabbit hole for many years now, or if you are just dipping your toes. This is what I want to do from now on, is just mix it up with high level shit, where if you're dealing with a hardcore NASA apologist, you can still smack them. Or if you're new and you need some help navigating through these waters, there's no shame in that. We are here. This is what it's for. Ask your questions and they will be answered. And like I said, if you are interested in helping out my man Chris, I know him. We have each other's cell phone numbers. So he's not a stranger. We joke around, we text each other. So Chris is the real deal. So if you can and want to, definitely, you can get in contact with me and I can send you his link tree and help him out, because as you know, the health care system isn't the greatest. And Mr. Marcus Allen, I would love to get in touch with you, and we need to schedule another show.
Yep.
I always love speaking with you. The shows we have done have been in my favorites right there for sure. Any last words before we sign off? Because and we're only doing this out of respect for you, Mr. Marcus Allen. It is super late in the UK, and we want to be completely respectful of that.
Yeah, just after midnight here in the UK now, but
Yes,
it's
sir.
fine. You know, I like working late at night. It's quiet.
Yeah, I know you do it, and you could go. You and I have done 3-4 hour podcasts in the past, so I know you have that stamina for sure.
Oh yeah, well, certainly in this. Oh, just one further thing on Dave McGowan.
Yes, sir.
His other major essay about Laurel Canyon, which is north of Los Angeles, is a very good parallel with the Wagging the Moon Doggy, because the two have links. Laurel Canyon basically discusses the early 1960s music scene, the Mamas and the Papas and Frank Zappa and such people, and the intelligence services, such as Jim Morrison, the lead singer of The Doors, whose father was the commander of the USS Maddox, which is the ship that was attacked, allegedly, that started the Vietnam War. So there are links. So Wagging the Moon Doggy, about the Apollo moon landing, or the fake Apollo moon landing, and Laurel Canyon, about the musicians and the intelligence services and how that all started, was created, helped to understand what was going on at the time. So Dave McGowan, I consider to be a major recorder of the history that we do need to understand in order to see why it was necessary for the moon landings to be faked, which they were. And as I always say, if anybody can prove me wrong on that, please let me know.
And Mr. Allen,
Come on, get it?
Wheezy, can I ask Mr. Allen one thing?
Of course.
Well, not even ask, but are you aware? In Wagging the Moon Doggy, Dave goes into the parallels. Whenever there would be a new atrocity to be released to the public about Vietnam, it would coincide with each Apollo mission, almost like a distraction. Did you notice that kind of thing going on? I mean, Dave points it out, but
yeah, there was certainly not quite such a visible link, but there would said when you look back and you do the historical research and you see the announcements that were being made. I mean, the My Lai massacre in May 1968 was the start of it, and all the way through the Da Nang stuff that went on in Vietnam, and the ridiculous evacuation from Vietnam. I mean, America were defeated by a bunch of basically farmers. It was sad. It was so sad. It was so unnecessary. And that was such an important event in American history. As you say, there had to be a distraction from it. And my view is that Apollo was the distraction.
Maybe that's why 18, 19, and 20 were canceled, because they didn't need to do it anymore.
That's right. Yeah, they were cancelled because they were due in what?
Distraction, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, sir, I think we should kick off the air. Nexus Magazine.
Oh, great. Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, get your copy now.
I've got my copy with Sabrel's issue in here. I'm holding it against the screen, but obviously you can't see it now because my camera died on me. Camera went Apollo 12 on me.
Yeah, Wheezy, can you run Jared's link there that he sent you?
Yeah.
This is my new book that's coming out soon.
Oh, the YouTube link? Hold on.
It's at the very bottom of the screen there.
Okay, yeah, it's 1:35. 1 second here. Hold up. Let me share screen it.
Oh, American Memory Hole. Oh, that's a nice
Memory
one.
Code.
Yeah, and by the way,
Don
Dave,
Jeffries.
video,
I have had Don Jeffries on my show too. All right, let's play this. This is Jared White's trailer. 1 second.
Hey, Yesterday, the Capitol was taken over by domestic terrorists. Yesterday, they could have blown the building up. They could have killed us all. People coming through the windows had backpacks as big as my desk on the Senate. Those backpacks could have had bombs, chemical agents, weapons. We dodged a major bullet yesterday.
Would you denounce what happened in 2016? And would you warn President Putin to never do it again?
He just said it's not Russia. I don't see any reason why it would be. President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today.
Smersh came from the motherland on a deadly mission to disrupt the 2020 election. Sid Tanner came to January 6th to hunt down the agents of Smersh. His past came back to hunt down him. Such is life. Trojan Smersh, a Sid Tanner thriller written by Jarrah White.
Sid Tanner is in the Capitol building. He knows about the Russians. He must be stopped.
All right. So in disclosure, I do not agree with all the views on the show. However, I do I let people of all opinions on my show. Last week I did a show with someone that doesn't believe in any conspiracies. Had a great discussion with him. It definitely brought out a bunch of emotions, pro and against me doing a show like that. So that is Mr. Jarrah White's intro. I just wanted to put that caveat. You know, I just because someone has certain thoughts doesn't mean I always agree with them. I disagree with.
And Dave McGowan, the video that I did with his, the video that I did for Alicia, it's on my channel too, about 3 years ago. So if anybody wants,
I want to see that, Bob. Yeah.
I've had I've had a lot of backlash from a bunch of Trump supporters, and quite frankly, I don't really care. Okay, because I did the research. My book Trojan Smersh uses the January 6th insurrection and the Russian interference in the 2016 election as a backdrop, and it basically, as you saw in the trailer, that after the insurrection, there was many fears on how much worse it could have been. And so my book plays on those fears and basically explores some what-if scenarios. It's my book also serves as an introduction to my my fictional super spy character, Sid Tanner. It was basically this rogue Australian agent, and he's basically been hunted by the CIA, by Smersh, by even his own former buddies at ASIS, right? Because he knows too much on both sides. He served during the war, and he was a member of the. He worked as an exchange officer to the U.S. Air Force Space Command, now the U.S. Space Force, and basically he learned of too many skeletons in the closet, so to speak, basically during his time there, and so he's been hunted. Now, in life's ironies, after an assassination attempt, he learns of a deadly conspiracy involving the Trump administration and the Russian death squad Smersh. Smersh is a portmanteau of the phrase Smert Spionen, which means death to spies. They were the Russian death squad of the Soviet Union during the World War II. In real life, they closed up shop after the war, but I actually learned this after my book got accepted for publication. It was resurrected as part of the invasion of Ukraine, which was a complete shock to me. But anyways, Tanner learns about this conspiracy involving Smersh and the Trump administration, these sinister plans for January 6th. He follows the clues and basically follows the Russians to the insurrection to basically hunt them down. At the same time, he is constantly hunted by assassins. So it should be the start of a new era, I hope. Ian Fleming had James Bond, Robert Ludlum had Jason Bourne. I have Sid Tanner.
Copy that. There you go. So, like I said, I mean, I especially on my show, I like to have a plethora of different views. I never want an echo chamber. So, yeah, all views are welcome. And in the future, like I mentioned before, I want to put that StreamYard early on. So if you want to call in and you have some legitimate gripes, or maybe you question whatever one of us has to say, call in and do it. Chris is a friend of mine, so that that almost doesn't count. But if you've got some serious questions, bring them in. And so this is what I want people to know, especially the What is Truth podcast. I never ever want an echo chamber. I want different views, even if I don't agree with them 100%. This is what it's all about. We want to get to the bottom of it. We want to get to the truth. And you don't do that in echo chambers. You do that by challenging your own beliefs at the end of the day. That's what I truly believe in. So, gentlemen, thank you so much again. This was an excellent show, as always. And I want to get in touch with you, Mr. Marcus Allen, and schedule a date with you. And Chris, I believe you're going to be doing a show. I'll send me the link. I'll definitely hop on your show. Jera has a YouTube channel. And as you saw his trailer, check him out as well. Mr. Robert Williams, he is the architect of all these incredible graphics and video editings. He is currently working on Dr. Raza's Cold War speak. So once we have all that together, I will be releasing it, with Mr. Robert Williams' editing magic and skills. I'm truly honored with having all you gentlemen as friends. Each and one of you I can reach out to personally and ask questions and shoot the shiz with you guys. And it doesn't get lost on me. I am truly grateful for that. All right, y'all. Hope everyone has a fabulous weekend, and I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you guys enjoyed this, if you guys watch it on the Apollo Detectives channel, hit them with a subscribe, hit them with the like. And if you watched it on the What is Truth platforms, wherever you may be listening to this, hit it with a like, comment, hit the polls, all that good stuff. All right, y'all. Hope everyone has an exquisite weekend. Take care.